Chapter 181. The dining hall was dimly lit, and a cold wind that came out of nowhere blew at the candlelight. The flickering candlelight shone on the faces of the two knights at the long table, making them look gloomy and depressing. After a long while, Colin finally snapped out of his daze from Vala's unexpected words. He stared at his brother-in-law, as if trying to discern if he was being honest with him or if he had other motives. As if seeing Colin's disbelief, Vala explained again. Actually, I was just as shocked as you when I first found out about this. Furthermore, I didn't dare tell Caitlin about it until now. How did you find out about this? I started to have suspicions after returning from the battlefield. Just as I told you, I only remember being stabbed by a troll warrior, but when I woke up, I was already in Fallen Eagle City. I've been trying to figure out what happened in between. I once asked my mother, but she told me that the people from the Tulip Merchant Guild saw me abandoned on the battlefield, so they saved me. But this explanation obviously didn't convince me. So, I went to check the trade records of the Tulip Merchant Guild, and there, I found that a merchant group did indeed return to Fallen Eagle City from the front lines during the time I was injured. It should be this merchant group that brought me back, but the timing was too coincidental, so coincidental that it was hard to believe that it wasn't deliberately arranged. So, you suspect that Madame Penny has a secret relationship with the trolls? Of course, I might be overthinking it. My mother might not have betrayed the interests of the northern frontier. After all, the Tulip Merchant Guild has always been doing business between the Troll Empire and the northern frontier, so it's inevitable that they would have some connections with the higher-ups of the trolls. Perhaps they really happened to pass by the battlefield and redeemed me. Vala defended his mother, but judging from his expression, even he didn't believe his own explanation. Colin sneered inwardly. Your mother's connection with the trolls is deeper than you think. But on the surface, he nodded in agreement, then continued to ask, then what about Knight Carter's assassination attempt on me? Why do you think that it was your mother's doing? Vala paused, seemingly hesitant, but after struggling for a moment, she still said, the merchant group that brought me back from the front lines actually passed by Grey Castle town. Moreover, it was the day before you were assassinated. Oh? Colin's eyes flashed. But that doesn't mean anything, does it? I've checked the account book of that caravan. It was recorded that a set of expensive enchanted armor was stolen, and the place where it was stolen was Grey Castle town. Then Colin came to a realization. How was this a theft? It was clearly a payment to Knight Carter as a commission for the assassination. No wonder Vala suspected that her mother was the mastermind. Then why do you think your mother sent someone to assassinate me? It should be for the Angeli family. Vala didn't dare to meet Colin's gaze, the shame on her face so thick that it almost covered her entire face. Baron Carter died at the front lines, and if you die as well, then Caitlin will become the first heir to the Angeli family's title, and I will also obtain a family property, and won't have to be looked down upon all day in Fallen Eagle City. Perhaps, this is my mother's plan. I'm sorry, Colin, I've let you down. Vala's honesty left Colin at a loss for how to respond. Originally, he already had a perfect plan for this banquet. He was prepared to use the conclusion he had deduced from the Red-Eye inheritance to make Vala believe that he was the true son of Count Amon, thus provoking her to hate the Viscounts of Lawrence and planting an unstable bomb within the Oman family. But who would have thought that things would turn out like this? As his mind raced, Colin suddenly felt that he had to change his way of thinking. Vala, my father didn't care about your illegitimate identity and treated you as his own, even marrying my sister to you. But you failed to protect my father and let him die tragically on the battlefield, while you lived on alone. Can such actions be considered the virtue of a knight? Before Vala could speak, Colin continued to press her. Your mother actually ordered an assassin to kill me in order to obtain a family property for you. Do you think you can get my forgiveness with a simple sorry? Vala's face flushed red in shame at Colin's questioning. She suddenly got up and left her seat, arriving in front of Colin and kneeling on one knee, at the same time holding the sword at her waist above her head with both hands. Viscount Angley, it is only right that I accept your judgment. Colin raised an eyebrow and sneered, What? Vala, do you think I won't kill you just because you married my sister? My crimes have nothing to do with Caitlin, and I don't expect you to forgive me for her sake." Vala's face was resolute, and his hands holding the sword did not tremble at all. "Actually, when I found out about my mother's actions, I already knew that only death can redeem my sins to Baron Angeli and to you." She then raised her head and looked at Colin with a calm expression, and said word by word, "Colin, please grant me release." Colin stared at Vala's eyes expressionlessly, as if trying to discern the sincerity in her words. Vala's blue eyes were as calm and deep as the surface of a windless sea. After a long while, Colin finally got up slowly. Clang! He unsheathed his long sword and pressed it against Vala's heart. Colin used a bit of force, and the sharp tip of the sword easily pierced through her thin outer clothes. Fresh blood dyed Vala's chest red, but his eyes did not tremble at all, and his body did not dodge at all. Colin narrowed his eyes and asked expressionlessly, "Vala, do you have any last words?" Vala's eyes finally rippled, and there was a hint of longing in his voice. "Please take good care of Caitlin, and help her find a good man to remarry. She's my sister, and I'll take good care of her even if you don't ask." Vala nodded, as if she was finally relieved. She slowly closed her eyes and waited for death to descend upon her. Colin hesitated for a moment, but still slowly stabbed the long sword into Vala's chest. He was not fast, and it seemed like he was purposely controlling his strength so that the long sword pierced into Vala's chest bit by bit. Throughout the entire process, Vala did not have any intention of dodging other than clenching his teeth in pain and trembling out of reflex. It was only when the long sword completely pierced through her chest and came out of her back that Vala slowly opened her eyes and looked at the world with nostalgia, and said softly to Colin, "I'm sorry." She then slowly slumped to the ground. Colin sighed, as if finally confirming Vala's sincerity. He had seen too many old schemers who would do anything for their own benefits, and a knight like Vala who was willing to atone for her sins with her death for the sake of justice in her heart was an anomaly. Colin sighed again as he looked at Vala, who was on the verge of death with a long sword pierced through his chest. In the end, she still bit him. Chapter 182. The blood mist dissipated. Colin returned to his seat. Vala was a Grade 3 knight, and according to Colin's experience of transforming Queen Aisha, embracing a bloodline that was lower in rank should not cause him to lose a rank. He quietly felt the changes in his body, and apart from feeling a little weak, he did not lose a rank. Heaving a sigh of relief, Colin poured himself another cup of deer blood wine, drinking it as he waited for Vala to wake up. To be honest, Vala's willingness to atone for his sins with his death had touched Colin greatly. Facing such a knight who held fast to the justice in his heart, Colin felt that he had to slightly change his original plan. After a long while, just as Colin was about to come up with a new plan, Vala finally woke up. "I'm not dead?" Vala sat up straight, looking at the long sword that was still stuck in his chest with a blank expression. "You are indeed dead," Colin said calmly, "but I have granted you a second life." Vala stared blankly at Colin. In her eyes, Colin's entire body seemed to be shrouded in a vast, holy, and irresistible radiance, causing people to have the urge to prostrate themselves in worship. "Colin, what is going on? Have you heard of the Blood Angels?" After a round of brainwashing, Vala's attitude toward Colin became extremely respectful. He slowly pulled out the long sword in front of his chest, raised it above his head, and knelt on one knee, solemnly swearing an oath. "Thank you, God's chosen one, for your supreme grace. I, Valaomon, hereby swear my loyalty to you. From this day onwards, until I return to the embrace of the Lord, I will serve you at all times. Your will shall be the direction of my sword, and your orders shall be the creed of my actions." Colin took Vala's sword and tapped his shoulder twice, accepting the knight's oath of loyalty. With the knight's previous display of loyalty to the virtues of a knight, Colin felt that this oath of loyalty might be even more reliable than the bonds of the blood breeds. "Vala, do you know why I forgive your sins and grant you a second life? God's chosen one, please instruct us." "Because you are just a pitiful person who has been kept in the dark." Vala's face was filled with confusion. Colin continued to explain, "You said that your mother, Penny, sent someone to assassinate me because she wanted to help you obtain a family business. Then let me ask you, Is your relationship with Ms. Penny really that close? Mother. Vala hesitated. Mother is not someone who is good at expressing her feelings. Colin sneered. Not good at expressing feelings? Do you really think that a mother would not know how to be intimate with her own son? Maybe she's a little conflicted about my identity as an illegitimate child. She's just a rank 1 commoner. What right does she have to look down on an illegitimate child? Even if she was conflicted about your identity and was unwilling to get close to you, why would she take such a huge risk to help you obtain the Angeli family's business? Vala did not know what to say now, and could only say respectfully, God's chosen one, please forgive my stupidity for not being able to see the reason. Actually, the real reason is very simple. Colin exuded a faint aura of might, and his tone became solemn. Penny is not close to you because she's not your biological mother. What? Vala looked up in shock, and looked at Colin in disbelief. Don't forget that I am the Blood Angel's apostle. Naturally, I can use divine spells to tell that you are actually a direct descendant of the Oman family, and that Lawrence is actually the illegitimate child of Penny and the Count. But I'm my father's son? Vala was completely dumbfounded. Lawrence is the illegitimate child? Colin leisurely swirled the wineglass in his hand and did not continue speaking. Instead, he let Vala digest this shocking news. The reason why he did not mention recessive inheritance was that compared to the unproven genetic theory of this world, profound divine spells were more likely to gain the trust of a devout knight. Vala indeed fell into a deep struggle because of Colin's words. He did not dare to question Colin's judgment, but he could not understand why he had been treated as an illegitimate child all these years if he really was Count Oman's son. Are you puzzled as to why you, a direct descendant, would be raised as an illegitimate child? Yes, please enlighten me, God's chosen one. Because even though Lawrence is an illegitimate child, his bloodline is nobler than yours. How? How is that possible? Vala was even more puzzled, but soon seemed to understand something. He quickly asked, you mean that Lawrence's birth mother, Penny, is not a commoner? That's right. Penny is actually a descendant of the house of St. Thean. Therefore, even though Lawrence is an illegitimate child, he is obviously nobler than you in Count Amon's eyes. The house of St. Thean? Vala finally understood. A descendant of a holy knight family was naturally nobler than him. It was only then that Vala understood why Penny was always so cold to him, completely lacking the closeness and attention that a normal mother should have. Knight Vala fell silent after understanding the whole story. His expression kept changing as the years of humiliation due to his identity as an illegitimate child suddenly surged into his heart, finally condensing into a lingering resentment and unwillingness. Colin's lips curled up slightly as he provoked again, Vala, do you know about cuckoos? Vala nodded with a gloomy expression. Cuckoos lay their eggs in the nests of sparrows, allowing the sparrows to raise their own offspring. Then what will happen to the real offspring of the sparrows? They will be squeezed out of the nest by the hatched cuckoos, falling to their deaths, starving to death. Vala's expression was so gloomy that it looked like water could drip from it. Then, Vala, are you willing to see Lawrence take over the title of Count that should have belonged to you, and let the Oman family become a breeding ground for the descendants of the house of St. Thean? Of course not. And that Countess of the Sudor family, your real mother, is said to have died of an illness. Do you believe that reason? Vala's eyes reddened as he squeezed out 2 words from his tightly clenched teeth. And your father, Count Amon. I can tell you with certainty that the reason why the trolls were able to defeat Marquis Charles's army, causing my father to die on the front lines and you to be heavily injured, was actually because he secretly leaked information to the trolls. Moreover, this time, in order to help the House of St. Thean make a comeback, Count Oman chose to betray his own lord and his own people once more, wholeheartedly wanting to cause chaos on the northern frontier. Are you still willing to serve such a person and be ordered around by him? Of course not. Vala's veins bulged as he clenched his fists. He suddenly looked up and asked sincerely, Lord Chosen One, what should I do? Hearing this, a satisfied smile finally appeared on Colin's face. Chapter 183. Winter in the northern frontier was always exceptionally long. Even at the end of February, the heavy snow and howling cold winds still showed no signs of abating. The spring that many people were looking forward to was nowhere to be seen. Ice Stone City, city gates. Colin, you can stop here. Caitlin reached out to hug her brother and even helped him fix the collar of his shirt. She reminded him, when you're free, you must come visit me at Eagle Falls City. Of course, of course. Colin nodded with a chuckle. You must be careful on the way as well. Knight Vala bowed solemnly to Colin. Lord Viscounts, don't worry. I will protect Caitlin well. Also, I will pass on the words you told me to Lord Father. You must let the Lord Count feel my goodwill. The friendship between the Angeli family and the Oman family will last forever. Colin said seriously. The two of them exchanged a tacit glance and finally waved goodbye. After sending off Vala and her husband, Colin had just returned to the Red Castle. Before he could sit down and rest, he saw butler Eamon hastily walk over. Master, there's another letter from Pine Town. Colin received it with a frown. He opened the letter and scanned through it. Then he actually laughed in anger. This Baron Lamba, he really isn't going to let this slide. Pine Town was located to the west of Icestone City and was Baron Lamba's territory. This Baron Lamba had once asked Colin to buy food. However, he wasn't as easy to get rid of as the young and immature Count Morrison. He haggled with Colin for a long time and annoyed Colin so much that they almost parted on bad terms. Although he finally accepted Colin's condition of paying in installments, he was obviously very dissatisfied with the result. As the news of Icestone City having enough food spread, the slaves in the vicinity flooded into Colin's territory and provided a large amount of labor for Colin. On the other hand, the surrounding territories of the Viscounts began to show signs of population loss. At first, they were only slaves. But later, as the famine deepened, the high price of food made it impossible for many commoners to afford food. These civilians who had run out of food also began to pack up their belongings and head towards Icestone City with their families. Of course, Colin didn't refuse anyone. He was well aware of the importance of population in this era, and Icestone City, which possessed a large amount of food, could continue to receive an influx of people. However, this obviously made the surrounding lords anxious. However, although they were anxious, they did not dare to do anything to Colin. After all, the Black Cavalry was in Icestone City. Although they were only remnants of an army, they were still not something that the surrounding minor lords could fight against. What's more, Colin had just defeated the famous Pegasus Legion in the Battle of Silver Moon City. Many people regarded him as the next rising star of the northern frontier after Marquis Garcia. Of course, there were always fools in this world who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. For example, Pine Forest Town's Baron Lamba. He had sent letters many times asking why Colin had taken in his citizens and even requested that Colin return all of Pine Forest Town's citizens. This attitude clearly angered Colin. Casually tearing up the letters and throwing them into the fireplace, Colin turned around and ordered Eamon, "Write a letter for me. Help me draft a reply letter. Tell Baron Lamba that I can't recognize any of the citizens of Pine Forest Town. If he wants his citizens back, then he has to personally come to Icestone City." "Yes, master." Just as Eamon was about to leave, he was stopped by Colin. "Wait, is there still no news from Winter City?" "None. It is said that the Duke of St. Hilda was injured in the duel with the paladins of the Troll Empire. Until now, he has not been able to receive the marriage proposal envoys we sent." Colin laughed coldly, clearly not believing the Duke's excuse. At this moment, he suddenly realized that Pine Forest Town's Baron Lamba might be a good opportunity to test the Duke. Thinking of this, a cold glint flashed through Colin's eyes. He immediately said to Eamon, "I will personally write a letter for Baron Lamba." After saying this, he sat down in front of the desk, picked up a quill, and quickly finished writing a letter. Eamon, who understood Colin's temperament very well, had already guessed that the wording of this letter might not be to Baron Lamba's liking. On this side, Colin had already sealed the letter and handed it to Eamon. "Send it to Pine Forest Town." "Yes, master." 5 days later, that Baron Lamba really did personally come to Icestone City. At the same time, He also brought over 1,000 soldiers. His murderous appearance made Knight Roger, who was on the city wall, laugh. "Who are you trying to scare with such a small number of people?" Knight Roger shook his head and laughed at the squire beside him as he ordered people to open the city gates and welcome Baron Lamba in. Baron Lamba was a middle-aged man with a sturdy figure and a rough face. The beard on his face was connected to his hair, making him look like an irritable gorilla. "Where is Viscount Angley?" Baron Lamba's voice was very loud, causing the snow on the city gates to rustle down as soon as he opened his mouth. Knight Roger gave a perfunctory salute and replied with a smile, "Lord Baron, our Viscounts is waiting for you at the Red Keep." Baron Lamba's expression became even more gloomy. He was clearly dissatisfied that Colin didn't greet him at the city gates. However, Colin's title was higher than his, so Baron Lamba couldn't really say that Colin was being rude. Of course, Baron Lamba wasn't afraid of Colin. After all, he wasn't Colin's vassal. Although there was a difference in their titles, they didn't have a subordinate relationship. He followed Knight Roger all the way to the Red Keep and saw that Colin was already waiting in front of the castle. Only then did Baron Lamba's expression soften slightly, but his attitude was still as cold as ever. Colin didn't seem to mind the other person's coldness and continued to smile as he greeted Baron Lamba. He even pretended to be affectionate as he pulled on the other person's arm and walked with him to the castle. Baron Lamba couldn't help but feel disdain in his heart. He originally didn't think highly of Colin, this rapidly rising Viscounts. He thought that the other person had only followed Marquis Garcia to the Sky Icefield for a stroll and gained some merit to be promoted to Viscounts. Now that the two sides had a conflict over population, Baron Lamba disliked Colin even more. This time, he came to Icestone City because he was determined to bring back all the citizens that originally belonged to Pine Town. Otherwise, there would probably be no one to help him with the upcoming spring plowing. Just as Baron Lamba was pondering how to open his mouth, he suddenly noticed that someone was quickly approaching from behind. He turned his head in confusion and saw an armored knight wearing a horseface mask dashing towards him, the long sword in his hand glinting with a chilling light. "Assassin!" Baron Lamba immediately yelled. He was about to draw his sword to meet the enemy when he suddenly realized that his right arm was tightly gripped by Colin and couldn't move at all. Baron Lamba was so scared that his soul almost left his body. He immediately realized that this was a trap, Angus. Before he even finished speaking, the strange man wearing the horseface mask had already rushed in front of Baron Lamba. The blade flashed and Baron Lamba's head was instantly chopped off. However, his body was still standing there, blood spurting out from his neck like a fountain. The Lamba family's guards were stunned by this sudden turn of events. They never would have thought that their lord would encounter an assassination at the entrance of the Red Keep. Until Colin's sharp voice rang out, "Catch him, don't let the assassin escape." Only then did the Lamba family's guards wake up from their daze and chase after the assassin who had already run far away. Knight Roger stared blankly at this scene and seemed to understand something. He carefully asked, "Sir, should we chase after him?" Only now did Colin let go of Baron Lamba's right arm and carefully avoided the blood spurting out from the other party's neck. He righteously ordered, "Of course we should chase. Baron Lamba died in Icestone City. We are duty-bound and must capture the assassin." Chapter 184. Under the raging cold wind, there were very few people on the streets of Pine Town. The high price of food caused the residents of this small town on the northern frontier to continuously leave. This also caused the town, which wasn't very prosperous to begin with, to become even more desolate. It was said that the irascible lord had already brought more than 1,000 soldiers to Icestone City, vowing to capture the fleeing citizens. However, before the citizens were captured, an earth-shattering piece of news came. The lord of Pine Town, Baron Lamba, had actually died in Icestone City. No one knew where this news came from, but it quickly spread throughout the town. In just one day, almost everyone in Pine Town knew of this news. But what was strange was that no one from the Lamba family came out to confirm the authenticity of this news. Of course, they didn't deny it either. For a moment, the streets, inns, and taverns of Pine Town were all discussing this shocking news. More and more information was gradually revealed. It was said that the person who assassinated Baron Lamba was an Eastern Knight. And this Eastern Knight's original target was actually Viscount Angley, the lord of the northern frontier who had personally destroyed the Sky Horse Legion. However, at that time, Baron Lamba and Viscount Angley were traveling together, and the assassin actually killed the wrong person in a panic. Poor Baron Lamba, just like that, became Viscount Angley's scapegoat. However, with the help of Viscount Angley, the assassin was still captured and sentenced to death by hanging. His corpse was hung in the plaza of Icestone City for a day and a night. These details, which were so vivid, increased the authenticity of this news. Most of the residents of Pine Town already believed that their lord had really met with misfortune in Icestone City. The night gradually deepened, but the Lamba family's castle was still brightly lit. A group of family members were gathered in the hall, fiercely debating. Baron Lamba's eldest son, White Lamba, was currently looking at his family members who were arguing with a gloomy expression, his heart filled with anxiety and annoyance. His father's death had caught White somewhat unprepared, and he also smelled a thick scent of conspiracy. How could the assassin from the eastern region be so coincidental? How could the assassin from the eastern region suddenly attack when his father went to visit Viscount Angley and kill the wrong person by coincidence? However, the family knight who came back to Pine Town to report confirmed the identity of the assassin. The assassin was indeed a knight from the eastern region, and a rather famous fourth-grade knight. This assassin had once participated in the Battle of Silver Moon City. After the battle, his whereabouts were unknown. He indeed had a blood feud with Viscount Angley, so his motive for assassinating him was very sufficient. However, White still felt that Viscount Angley had something to do with his father's death. After all, the reason father went to Icestone City was to cause trouble for the other party. Just as White's imagination was running wild, he suddenly heard someone calling his name. He raised his head and saw the butler looking at him with concern. "Young master, are you all right?" "I'm fine." "Young master, you have to make a decision quickly." "What decision?" Everyone looked at the bewildered White and was momentarily speechless. They had been arguing here for so long, but the young master didn't listen at all. In the end, it was the butler who asked for instructions. "Young Master White, recently, because of the old master's death, the people of Pine Town are in a state of panic. In addition, the elites of the family army are still in Icestone City, so we've already discovered that many people with evil intentions are secretly inciting the civilians who lack food and preparing to rob the town's granaries. Therefore, what we should do next? Please make a decision." White's brows instantly furrowed even tighter. He didn't expect that at such a time, there would actually be signs of a rebellion in Pine Town. The slave rebellion from before had already exhausted the Lamba family. If another civilian rebellion occurred, and at such a sensitive time, White was very doubtful that his family would be able to survive. "Notify the entire town, starting tonight, there will be a curfew." White had just opened his mouth when he suddenly discovered that the outside of the castle was suddenly boiling. Soaring flames lit up the pitch-black night sky, and waves of battle cries broke the silence of the night. When the people of the Lamba family saw this situation, they instantly panicked and hurriedly looked at White for help. At this time, White was also extremely panicked, but he still forced himself to calm down and ordered the family knights to immediately gather the army and suppress the rebellion. At this time, Pine Town had indeed become a pot of porridge. All kinds of rumors started out of nowhere, but they quickly spread like a plague. Some said that the Lamba family was preparing to flee with the last of the town's food reserves. Some also said that the trolls were about to invade again, and that there was no hope for this year's spring plowing. Some even said that when Baron Lamba went to Icestone City, he took all the elites of the family army with him, so at this time, Pine Town's military strength was empty. Panic, impatience, and greed continued to spread, causing all the townspeople who were suffering from food shortage to become restless. No one knew who shouted first and lit the first fire, but soon, this fire engulfed the entire Pine Town like a prairie fire. Thus, the rebellion began. When the faint light of dawn dispersed the thick fog in the wilderness, an army was slowly advancing towards Pine Town. "Sir Viscounts, Pine Town is not far ahead." "You really don't need to continue escorting us," We can definitely escort the Lord Baron's body back. Knight Mark respectfully advised Colin. This knight of the Lamba family was especially vigilant towards the young lord of Icestone City. He also felt that the Lord Baron's death was very strange. Sigh, Baron Lamba died in Icestone City, and I have an unavoidable responsibility. Let me send his body back to Pine Town. Moreover, there have been many rebellions on the northern frontier recently, so I am worried that you will encounter some mishap on your way back. Knight Mark silently cursed in his heart. The greatest mishap has already happened in your Icestone City. However, when faced with the powerful Viscount Angley, he still couldn't change anything. He could only suppress his worries in the bottom of his heart and silently advance towards Pine Town. After walking for a while, a scout suddenly returned and reported, "Sir Viscounts, Pine Town ahead is ablaze. It seems that a rebellion has occurred." What? Knight Mark was still in shock, but Colin had already decisively issued an order. "Pass down my orders, speed up and enter the town to quell the rebellion. Sir Viscounts, it should only be a small-scale slave rebellion. Our Lamba family can definitely deal with it ourselves, there is no need to trouble you." Knight Mark still didn't want the Angeli family's army to enter Pine Town, but Colin completely ignored him and still gave the order. "Knight Mark, there is no need to be so formal. We are all vassals of the Duke of St. Hilda, so it is only right that we help each other. Black Cavalry, attack." With this order, the Black Cavalry, who had been waiting for a long time, immediately rushed towards Pine Town like a surging tide. Knight Mark stared blankly at the cavalry army in the distance, the uneasiness in his heart reaching its peak. Chapter 185. In Pine Town, the rebellion had yet to be completely quelled. However, under the suppression of the Lamba family's army, the rebel army's arrogance had been completely suppressed. Based on this trend, it wouldn't be long before the rebellion was completely quelled. Some of the rebels also saw that the situation wasn't good. Seeing that they couldn't defeat the Lamba family's army, they rushed towards the town gates, preparing to take the wealth and food they had plundered from the night before and escape Pine Town. Seeing this, the Lamba family's army didn't stop them. They didn't have enough manpower right now, so their main task was to stabilize the situation within the town. It would be hard to take care of the rebels who escaped, and their escape would reduce the pressure on them. However, just as the rebel army successfully opened the east gate of the town and was about to rush out, they suddenly heard the low sound of a horn from afar. Then, the thunderous sound of horse hooves shook the earth of Pine Town. The black mass of cavalry instantly filled the wilderness outside the town. The rebel army had never seen such an imposing cavalry charge. They were so scared that they immediately scrambled back into the town. It was as if the Lamba family's army was a group of harmless sheep compared to the fierce cavalry. The Black Cavalry has come under the orders of Viscount Angley to assist in quelling the rebellion. Knight Roger, who had rushed to the outskirts of Pine Town, roared. He didn't care whether the Lamba family was willing to accept their help or not. He directly led the black mass of cavalry into the town like a sharp arrow. The situation that followed was naturally easy to describe. The rebel army that even the Lamba family's army couldn't fight against could only kneel and surrender when faced with the even more terrifying Black Cavalry. However, the arrival of the Black Guards caused the people of the Lamba family to be deeply worried. They didn't believe that the Black Cavalry would be so kind as to come and help them quell the rebellion. Moreover, the timing of the Black Cavalry's arrival was too coincidental. Just like how Baron Lamba was assassinated in Icestone City, it was full of coincidences. However, when there were too many coincidences, it was hard to believe that this wasn't a scheme planned by someone with ulterior motives. When Colin entered Pine Town, the rebellion in the town had already been quelled. The members of the Lamba family nervously welcomed the powerful young Viscounts into their own castle. "Lord Viscounts, thank you for extending a helping hand this time. The Lamba family will forever be grateful." White carefully followed behind Colin and respectfully thanked him. The ferocious Black Cavalry made him feel a strong threat, so even though he was full of doubts about this Viscount Angley, White didn't dare to show it. "Knight White, there's no need to be so polite. As for your father's death, I was also responsible for not being able to protect him well. Therefore, Helping to quell the rebellion this time can be considered my apology to the Lamba family. Colin spoke politely, but after entering the castle hall, he sat on the main seat. The corner of White's mouth twitched, but he didn't dare to say anything. The steward of the Lamba family carefully probed, "Lord Viscounts, how many days are you planning to stay in Pinetown? We'll arrange a reception for you." "There's no need to specially arrange anything." Colin smiled and waved his hand. "I'll leave today." White's eyes brightened. He suddenly felt that he might have misunderstood this Viscount Angley. But in the next second, he immediately dispelled this childish thought, because Colin continued. "However, Knight Roger will stay behind, and a portion of the Black Cavalry will also stay behind to prevent another rebellion in Pinetown. Lord Viscounts, we appreciate your kindness, but protecting Pinetown is the responsibility of the Lamba family, and we have the ability to shoulder it alone. There's no need for you to." "Knight White," Colin directly interrupted White's excuse, "you're not the Lord of Pinetown yet, right?" "Indeed, I'm not." Although White was the eldest son of Baron Lamba and the first heir to the title of Baron, strictly speaking, he couldn't be considered the Lord of Pinetown until he was personally conferred the title by the Duke of St. Hilda. Colin spread out his hands and said, "So, your priority now is to go to Winter Castle to accept the conferment of the Dukes of the North, and not to boast to me about your ability to protect Pinetown. I'm not doubting your ability, but your qualifications." Wright opened his mouth and was about to defend himself, but Colin didn't give him the chance to do so. He said in an aggressive tone, "You're right. Furthermore, Knight White, if I didn't lead the army to help the Lamba family quell the rebellion, you might not even be able to protect Pinetown. According to the feudal rules, if you lose Pinetown, what qualifications do you have to inherit your father's title?" This time, White couldn't hold it in anymore and loudly defended himself, "Lord Viscounts, you can't doubt the ability of the Lamba family. Even without the help of the Black Cavalry, we can still defend Pinetown. As for whether I have the qualifications to inherit the title of Baron, that's up to the Dukes of the North to decide." Colin chuckled and waved his hand, indicating that White didn't need to be agitated. He said calmly, "That's why I said that your priority now is to go to Winter Castle to meet the Duke. Don't worry, I have no intention of competing with the Lamba family for the ownership of Pinetown. Since you have no intention of occupying Pinetown, please take your army with you." "Knight White, you're too petty. The reason I left my army behind is to help you defend Pinetown. Don't be in a hurry to reject me. Don't you need the family's army to escort you to Winter Castle? You should know that the northern frontier isn't peaceful now. If you take away the family's army, aren't you worried that Pinetown's rebellion will rise again?" White was speechless and seemed to feel that Colin's words made sense. Seeing this, the old butler of the Lamba family hurriedly stood up and said, "Lord Viscounts, thank you for your kindness. However, the Lamba family doesn't want to owe too many favors, so it's best that we sign an agreement to determine the conditions and rewards for your assistance in defending Pinetown." White finally reacted and nodded repeatedly, "Yes, yes. Lord Viscounts, let's sign an agreement." Colin laughed inwardly, seeing through the Lamba family's plan. They wanted to write down the conditions for the garrison's assistance on paper. This way, Colin wouldn't be able to blatantly plot against Pinetown. However, what the Lamba family didn't know was that Colin didn't intend to occupy this town. "All right. However, as a reward for dispatching troops to quell the rebellion and assisting in maintaining stability, I need 10 years of logging rights in the northern forest region of Pinetown." 10 years? White exclaimed and shook his head repeatedly, "That's too long. Lord Viscounts, I can only give you 3 years of logging rights at most." The northern forest region of Pinetown could be said to be the Lamba family's cash cow. The red pine trees produced there were not only excellent construction materials, but they also produced a type of pine resin that was an extremely expensive medicinal material. "Knight White, before you accept the Duke's conferment and become the Lord of Pinetown, you have no right to bargain with me. The Angeli family will protect Pinetown for you for the time being." White suppressed the humiliation and anger in his heart and could only lower his head. "All right, then I'll have to trouble you, Lord Viscounts. I'll set off for Winter Castle to pay my respects to the Duke." Only then did Colin reveal a satisfied smile. His gaze passed through the Lamba family and looked in the direction of Winter Castle. Duke of St. Hilda, it's time for you to come out and meet your guests. Chapter 186. The Oman family's castle was located in the northwest of Fallen Eagle City, occupying a large area of land. Unlike the other nobles' castles, this castle did not have an exquisite garden or unique architecture. Instead, the empty space around the castle was filled with crops and fruit trees. The castle was built with sturdy but slightly rustic limestone. It had a simple design and did not have any extra decorations, making full use of the space. Amongst the nobles who pursued elegance and luxury, the Oman family who advocated frugality and practicality were an exception. It was said that this style was brought into the Oman family by the commoner grade 6 warrior who married the countess, but it had been passed down to this day. This generation's Count Oman agreed with this tradition and was not ashamed of it. Instead, he proudly proclaimed, "When you have a higher spiritual pursuit, material pleasures are not worth mentioning." However, this Count Oman did not seem to have much attainment in the arts, so he did not know what the spiritual pursuit he was talking about was. In the evening, a group slowly entered the castle. The Oman family's guards did not stop them, but they did not welcome them either. They knew that this was the Count's illegitimate son, Knight Vala, who had returned. Knight Vala seemed to be used to the guards' cold attitude. After entering the castle, she helped Caitlin off the carriage. After sending Caitlin back to her room, Vala walked towards the dining hall. She knew that her father was most likely having his meal at this time. It was a tradition of the Oman family to finish their dinner before the sun set. That way, they could save a candle. As expected, Vala saw Count Oman in the dining hall, as well as his lover, Lady Penny. The two were sitting at a long table and enjoying their dinner. In the past, whenever Vala saw such a scene, she would feel a faint warmth in her heart, thinking that her father really doted on her mother to allow a commoner girl to sit at the same table as him. But now, Vala could only feel a bone-deep anger. The story of the cuckoo taking over the sparrow's nest that Colin told her surfaced in Vala's mind again, almost causing her to lose her composure. Father, mother. Vala forcefully suppressed the anger in her heart and greeted them with a normal expression. Count Oman had already finished his meal, and the servants on the side immediately came forward to clear the table. Did the trip to Ice Stone City go smoothly? Count Oman wiped his mouth with a napkin and asked. Everything is going well. Viscount Angley welcomed us warmly. Dimon, what's the current situation in Ice Stone City? We have enough food and soldiers. Count Allman pondered over Vala's brief comment and frowned slightly. Then, have you figured out Viscount Angley's inclination? Yes. I'm sure that if a rebellion breaks out at the northern frontier, Viscount Angley will definitely stand by our side. Why are you so sure? Count Oman raised an eyebrow. Viscount Angley was already holding a grudge against the Duke of St. Hilda for marrying Miss Vera to Prince Tup. In Silvermoon City, he discovered that the Duke had actually sent someone to assassinate Vera, using Vera's death as an excuse for the northern frontier to intervene in the half-elf kingdom. This also caused Viscount Angley, who loved Miss Vera, to be completely disappointed in the Duke of St. Hilda, and even resented him. When he heard Vala say that Colin thought that the Duke had tried to assassinate Vera, Count Oman's eyes flashed slightly, but his expression quickly returned to normal. So, Vera chose to stay in Silvermoon City instead of returning to the northern frontier because she resented the Duke of St. Hilda? Yes. Count Oman nodded, as if he agreed with Vala's judgment. Then, he suddenly remembered something and asked, By the way, you haven't eaten yet, right? No, I haven't. Caitlin is still waiting for me in the room. I will eat with her later. All right, then go quickly. Remember to finish your meal before the sky turns dark. Vala bowed again to Count Oman and Penny before taking her leave. Until Vala's figure disappeared from the hall, his biological mother, Penny, did not take the initiative to speak to him. Do you think Viscount Angley has a chance of winning him over? Penny put down the knife and fork in her hand and finally spoke. Count Oman shook his head slowly. Ever since the failed assassination attempt a year ago, the Angeli family has not been on the same side as us. Do you think he knows that we were the ones who sent the assassins? He should have guessed it. Count Amon's eyes were deep. From the series of events in Silvermoon City, this Colin Angeli is a very smart person. It is impossible for him not to guess that we were the ones who did it. Penny snorted softly and complained, "You should not have caused trouble and coveted the Angeli family's title. You have already treated Vala very well. First, you let him be baptized as a knight, then you helped him marry a noble lady. There is no need to think of ways to compensate him." Guilt flashed in Count Amon's eyes, but he did not explain anything. Instead, he asked, "Since the Angeli family is difficult to win over, how does your brother plan to deal with them?" Penny hesitated, but shook her head. "I don't know. My brother did not tell me." Count Amon's expression was calm, but an indescribable anger surged in his heart. He knew that he was no longer trusted. During the chaos at the northern frontier a year ago, his indecisiveness had caused the St. Thean family to be on guard. This time, they were clearly on guard against him. Seeing her silent husband, Pan and I smiled and said gently, "You don't have to be impatient. Spring is coming." My brother's plan at the northern frontier is complete. This time, the House of St. Hilda will not be able to escape destruction. Where is your brother now? He is in Imperial Dragon City. Count Amon frowned, but did not ask what Penny's brother was doing in the capital of the Radiant Empire, because he knew that even if he asked, Penny would not tell him the truth. There was no need for him to ask for a rebuff. Actually, regarding this rebellion, Earl Amon had no confidence at all. Many of the St. Thean family's plans were hidden from him. This feeling of not being able to see the big picture made Count Amon very anxious. Moreover, he knew his lord, the Duke of St. Hilda, who had controlled the northern frontier for more than 30 years. He knew that the other party was not someone who could be easily dealt with. Moreover, this duke had hidden his strength. A paladin was enough to suppress a region. Although the St. Thean family had invited the paladins of the giant demon empire to heavily injure the Duke of St. Hilda, no one knew how serious the injuries of the Dukes of the North were. Penny seemed to see the man's worry. She smiled and said, "The repairs to the city walls of Falling Eagle City have been completed. I was thinking that since we still have some construction materials left, should we repair and strengthen some of the old buildings in the city?" You can arrange that yourself," Count Amon replied casually, then stood up. "I'm going to the study." Penny smiled and stood up. At the same time, she raised her head as if waiting for the man's kiss. But Count Amon did not seem to notice his lover's hint and walked out. Chapter 187. As one of the oldest cities on this continent, Imperial Dragon City was established much earlier than the Empire of Light. Its history could be traced back to 7,000 years ago. At that time, the dragons had not gone extinct, and the High Elves had not disappeared. These two powerful races were also the rulers of the world at that time. However, a mountain could not accommodate two tigers. The war between the dragons and the elves was also the main theme of that era. At the beginning of the war, the dragons relied on their stronger individual strength to suppress the elves. However, as the war continued, the dragons' population decreased, and their weakness of reproduction was gradually exposed. The elves began to gain the upper hand and gradually drove the dragons out of the center of the continent. Then the Empire of Light was established, and Imperial Dragon City was the capital of the Empire of Light. The name of the city was deliberately chosen by the elves to humiliate the dragons. The so-called Imperial meant to control and dominate. It was due to this reason that Imperial Dragon City had become a thorn in the side of the dragons ever since it was built. Throughout history, countless angry dragons had attempted to burn it to the ground with their dragon flames, but none of them succeeded. The dragons and the High Elves had disappeared from the world. Imperial Dragon City, the most dazzling stage in the center of the continent, now had a new protagonist. Now, there were not many buildings left by the elves in Imperial Dragon City. The river of time could wash away all traces. Humans had been the owners of Imperial Dragon City for more than 1,000 years, and had deeply engraved their mark in the bones of the city. But the palace was an exception. This palace, called Phoenix Palace, was the only building left by the elves. The ruler of the High Elves was called Phoenix King, and this palace was his former palace. Because of the efforts of the best architects of the elves, this beautiful palace had been preserved until today. Even the San Lorenzo royal family was conquered by its beauty, the glory it represented, and the glory it symbolized. They were willing to use it as the palace of the Empire of Light. Phoenix Palace was located in the center of Imperial Dragon City. It was a group of hundreds of palaces. The high dome of the main palace was white and flawless. It was a dome inlaid with pieces of white jade. Even in the moonless night, it emitted a cold light. The walls of the palace were inlaid with light blue frosted marble tiles, which looked grotesque under the sunlight. Hundreds of marble columns carved with rose patterns supported the high roof, and the inner walls of the roof were painted with all kinds of murals. Small and round sculptures of young girls were neatly arranged on the wide window. Each of them had different shapes and looked charmingly naive. The king's chi that had been accumulated over thousands of years made the entire main hall exude a thick and heavy pressure, causing those who stepped into it to involuntarily want to prostrate themselves in worship. However, in such a solemn palace, waves of decadent sounds could be heard. An attendant walked to the front of the hall and immediately stopped awkwardly. With a wry smile, he stood in the cold wind and waited quietly. However, the sounds of moaning continued to enter the servant's ears, causing him to feel hot all over. But when the bone-piercing cold wind blew, he immediately sobered up and hurriedly covered his ears with both hands until he could no longer hear the movements in the hall. After a long time, the door of the hall finally opened, and a beautiful lady with a graceful figure walked out. The servant hurriedly put down his hands and bowed. The noblewoman saw the waiter shivering in the cold wind and smiled charmingly at him. "Ah, are you eavesdropping?" After saying that, she did not wait for the servant to answer and left with a smile. The servant lowered his head from beginning to end, not daring to look at the lady at all. But that familiar voice still allowed him to distinguish the identity of the other party. It was Marquise Grandy. However, the servant was not too surprised. After all, His Majesty's hobby of cuckolding his vassals was no secret in the circle of the empire's nobles. The nobles of Imperial Dragon City had long been accustomed to this. It had even evolved to the point that if there was no cuckolding on their heads, they would be embarrassed to call themselves a true noble of the empire. The servant slowly walked into the hall and bowed meticulously, not daring to show any emotions on his face. The current emperor of the Empire of Light was named Reinhardt San Lorenzo, and he was also respectfully called Emperor Reinhardt. Emperor Reinhardt was a burly middle-aged man with blonde hair and blue eyes. He had a thick beard and straight eyebrows. Coupled with the unique aquiline nose of the San Lorenzo family, he looked very imposing at first glance. It was just that he was dressed too casually at this time. He was only wearing a thin shirt with his chest open, revealing his thick golden chest hair. The servants brought in the cold wind from outside the hall, but Emperor Reinhardt didn't feel cold at all. "Your Majesty, the emissary of the Gnome Kingdom will arrive in Imperial Dragon City tomorrow morning. Do you want to meet him personally?" Emperor Reinhardt picked up the goblet on the table and poured all the red wine in it into his mouth. He seemed to still feel thirsty, so he poured himself another goblet and drank it in one gulp. Burp. After burping without caring about his image, Emperor Reinhardt glanced at the servant and asked in an emotionless tone, "Didn't we agree to let the queen meet him?" The servant replied carefully, "Your Majesty, it was Her Highness who asked me to ask you." "She hopes that you..." Emperor Reinhardt waved his hand impatiently. "It's just an emissary of the Gnome King. The queen can meet him. What else is there?" "The Prime Minister hopes that you can attend the Imperial Conference tomorrow. He said that the spring plowing is imminent and needs you." Emperor Reinhardt became even more impatient. "The Prime Minister can host the Imperial Conference himself. I have other things to do." The attendant nodded and then carefully said, "Your Majesty, it will be Prince Leahy's birthday in 3 days. Her Highness the Empress wants me to ask you, will the prince's birthday banquet be held in the banquet hall of Phoenix Palace like in previous years?" Hearing this, Emperor Reinhardt fell silent. The servant, who did not get a response for a long time, secretly raised his head, only to see the emperor's cold gaze. The servant trembled in fear and hurriedly lowered his head again. He was annoyed that he dared to raise his head just now. The atmosphere in the hall seemed to freeze in an instant. After a long time, the servant's cold sweat had almost soaked his clothes. Finally, he heard Emperor Reinhardt's calm voice. "Yes, the same as in previous years." "Yes, Your Majesty." The servant was relieved. He hurriedly bowed and left, not daring to delay for a moment longer. The heavy door of the hall opened and closed, isolating the snowy world outside. Emperor Reinhardt picked up his wine cup again and began to drink by himself. The hall was filled with a decadent aura, as well as a faint trace of resentment. Suddenly, Emperor Reinhardt's gaze froze. He turned his head abruptly. The golden curtain moved without any wind, and a man covered in a black mage robe appeared there. However, there was a sharp sword pressed against his neck. However, the man did not seem to care about such a threat. He continued to smile at Emperor Reinhardt. "Your Majesty, when did Prince Archwai have the right to hold a birthday banquet in the Phoenix Palace?" Chapter 188. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. He accidentally slipped into the palace and disturbed you." The knight with the sword bowed slightly to Emperor Reinhardt and apologized. Emperor Reinhardt looked at the intruder who was restrained by his knight and smiled. He waved his hand and said, "It's okay. You can leave now." The knight was still a little hesitant, but the intruder in the mage robe said, "Your Majesty is a 6th grade knight. Is he afraid of a mage at such a close distance?" This was true. A mage was definitely at a disadvantage in a one-on-one duel with a knight, especially when the two sides were close enough. If this mage who broke into the Phoenix Palace wanted to harm Emperor Reinhardt, his head would be twisted off by the 6th grade knight as soon as the first syllable of the spell came out of his mouth. Humph! The knight glared at the intruder fiercely and then withdrew his sword. He bowed to Emperor Reinhardt and then quietly left. "I heard that they all call you Mr. Feng?" Emperor Reinhardt poured himself another glass of red wine and looked at the mage opposite him with a smile. "It's just a title. Your Majesty, you can call me whatever you want." Mr. Feng put down his hood, revealing a slightly pale and weather-beaten face. He walked to Emperor Reinhardt and bowed respectfully. Emperor Reinhardt looked at the impeccable palace etiquette and said with a smile, "It's been more than 300 years. It's hard for you to still remember how to bow." "Of course I remember," Mr. Feng said seriously. "If I don't dare to mention my family name and forget the etiquette, what's the difference between our family and those muddle-headed civilians?" "Heh, you're quite resentful," Emperor Reinhardt said playfully. "I wouldn't dare. Your Majesty, we, Saint Thean, will always abide by our duties. We're not like some people who get carried away and take Your Majesty's favor as the right to overstep their boundaries." "Duty?" Emperor Reinhardt seemed to have heard the biggest joke in the world. When the judge of your family pierced the back of the Black Emperor with his sword, was he also abiding by his duties? "Your Majesty, no matter how pure the bloodline of the white sheep is, it's inevitable that there will be a black mutant among them. You cannot disregard the loyalty of the House of Saint Thean just because of the Inquisitor's betrayal. Just like how we can't deny the San Lorenzo family's status as a model knight just because of Prince Lacey's arrogance." Reinhardt could not help but laugh when he saw that Mr. Fu kept bringing the topic to Prince Lacey. "Prince Lacey is my uncle, and he's also a powerful paladin. Do you think he's not qualified to be a role model for knights? Your Majesty, if you want to be a role model for knights, you need not only strength, but also the most important virtue." There is no doubt about Prince Lacey's strength, but as a collateral descendant of the San Lorenzo family, he has become arrogant because of the favor. He has repeatedly occupied the banquet hall of Phoenix Palace to hold birthday celebrations. This kind of behavior is a serious violation of a knight's virtue. "Mr. Chi, you took such a huge risk to come to Phoenix Palace to see me, just to sow discord between me and Prince Ara? If that's really the case, then your House of Saint Thean should continue to be silent for another 300 years. Faced with Emperor Reinhardt's ridicule, Mr. Fu was still calm, as if nothing in the world could move him. He shook his head and said, "No, Your Majesty. No, Your Majesty, I'm actually here for the northern region." "The northern frontier?" "I heard that you've made a big scene in the northern frontier." You even joined forces with the trolls. What, do you really think I can't kill you, a traitor to the human race? Your Majesty, please don't get angry. Think about it carefully. I've been in the troll empire for so many years. Have the trolls' strength grown or weakened? Emperor Reinhardt swirled the red wine glass in his hand and sneered disdainfully. What? You want to take the credit for Marquis Garcia? No, Your Majesty, that's not what I meant. The House of St. Hilda is certainly worthy of being the barrier to the north of the empire. I don't dare to take the credit. I just want to tell you that the trolls are just a knife in my hand. I have no feelings for them, let alone loyalty. Then who are you going to cut with the knife in your hand now? The House of St. Hilda. Mr. Fu said without hesitation. Emperor Reinhardt didn't show any surprise. Obviously, he already knew. Then why did you come to me? I want to ask you not to intervene in the upcoming war on the northern frontier. Ha! Emperor Reinhardt suddenly laughed. Have you forgotten that the Duke St. Hilda is the Empress' brother? Why do you think I'll sit by and watch a traitor's descendant like you steal the power of the northern frontier? Mr. Fu seemed to have a card up his sleeve in the face of Emperor Reinhardt's questioning. He slowly took out a scroll from his loose mage robe and respectfully handed it to the Emperor. Emperor Reinhardt showed a trace of doubt, but he still took it personally. When he opened it, he saw that the scroll was filled with dense elvish characters. Emperor Reinhardt, who had received a strict palace education, naturally understood the elvish characters. But the more he read, the more he frowned. Mr. Fu stood with his hands behind his back and waited quietly. Only the sound of steady breathing could be heard in the hall. There wasn't much content in the scroll, but Emperor Reinhardt read it for half an hour. When he raised his head again, the frivolous expression on his face had disappeared, and his tone had become extremely solemn. How can you make me believe that it will succeed? Mr. Fu bowed again and said indifferently, I'll show it to you at the northern frontier. I only ask that you give me this opportunity. Also, I still believe that Prince RHY isn't qualified to hold a birthday party in Phoenix Palace. This time, Emperor Reinhardt didn't speak. After pondering for a while, he finally nodded. Okay, I'll give you a chance. Thank you, Your Majesty. A smile finally appeared on Mr. Fu's skinny face. How many people have read this scroll? Including you, 3 people? Emperor Reinhardt narrowed his eyes, and his sharp eyes were full of undisguised fear. Who else besides you and me? Mr. Fu didn't say anything. The atmosphere in the hall became more and more solemn, and visible heat waves rose in the air. Emperor Reinhardt's eyes had turned golden, and countless tiny golden lines crawled all over his face, as if he was wearing a golden mask. An invisible pressure filled the hall, making it hard for people to breathe. Mr. Su was like a small boat in the middle of a stormy sea, as if he could be torn to pieces by this violent storm at any time. But his expression was still indifferent, and he ignored Emperor Reinhardt's threat. After an unknown amount of time, the storm suddenly calmed down. The golden light quietly faded away, and Emperor Reinhardt returned to his original lazy and frivolous posture, as if everything that happened just now was just an illusion. Okay, Mr. Fu, I'll give you a chance. I hope that you can prove to me that you are qualified to be the new lord of the northern frontier. Mr. Fu let out a long breath. Obviously, he wasn't as relaxed as he appeared to be. Thank you, Your Majesty. Chapter 189. Viscount Austin, why are you only here now? I thought that the Eastern Territory didn't want to redeem Marquis Vincent? Colin lazily leaned against the recliner and narrowed his eyes at the Viscount Austin in front of him. Whitey was curled up on his leg like a blue sea cucumber, sleeping soundly. My apologies, Lord Viscounts. I had some matters to attend to, so I was delayed. The Viscount Austin's expression was a bit awkward, but he didn't have the nerve to say the reason he was delayed until now. The reason he had only arrived at Icestone City now was because he had underestimated the chaotic situation at the northern frontier and overestimated the combat strength of his own guards. Before the Winter Festival, the Viscount Austin had already set out for Icestone City under the orders of the Duke of the Eastern Territory, but after entering the northern frontier, he realized that he had brought too few guards with him. After bracing himself and advancing for a few days, The 100 or so guards that the Viscount Austen had brought with him suffered heavy losses. Those starving slave mobs attacked his troops without any regard for their lives. Adding on the fact that he was unfamiliar with the place, the Viscount Austen hadn't even seen the shadow of Icestone City before he realized that his guards were on the verge of collapse under the endless attacks of the rebel army. Helpless, he could only lead his troops back. When he returned, he was naturally scolded by the Duke of the Eastern Territory and even had one of his ribs broken. After resting at home for a while, the Viscount Austen brought enough guards and set out on his second trip to Icestone City. This time, he finally arrived without a hitch. Of course, there were many dangers along the way, but the Viscount Austen definitely wouldn't tell Colin. After all, it would really damage the reputation of the nobles of the Eastern Territory. Then, what does the Duke of St. Prospero think of my suggestion? The Duke agrees with your suggestion and is willing to exchange Marquis Garcia for Marquis Vincent. When and where? If you don't have any objections, we will exchange the prisoners of war in a month at the Raging River. The Viscount Austen took out a simple map with markings and handed it to Colin. I have no problem with the location. Colin looked at the mark on the map and said, but as for the time, change it to 3 months later. All right, the northern frontier isn't very peaceful right now. Let's do it in 3 months. I'll go back and report to the Duke. If he doesn't have any objections, then it's settled. Yes. From the beginning to the end, the two of them didn't mention any prisoners other than the two marquises because they knew that there were no other prisoners. In the Battle of Shadow Canyon, other than the 8,000 remnants of the army that managed to escape under the leadership of Knight Roger and the captured Marquis Garcia, the rest of the black cavalry soldiers had all died in battle. Similarly, after the battle at Silver Moon City, Colin had returned the favor by executing all the prisoners of war in the Sky Horse Army. The first confrontation between the northern frontier and the eastern region after 100 years could be said to be a lose-lose situation. Perhaps, this was the result that the St. Thean family, who was hiding in the shadows and manipulating the situation, wanted to see the most. Not long after the Viscount Austen left, Steward Aemon came to report, "Master, the reinforcements from the half-elf kingdom are about to arrive." Colin excitedly stood up from his seat and smiled. "Oh, come with me to welcome them." In order to deal with the impending storm on the northern frontier, Colin had written a letter to Queen Aisha last month, asking her to send the Silver Moon Guard to Icestone City to provide support. Queen Aisha naturally wouldn't refuse Colin's request and sent out the order the day she received the letter. When Colin led the Knight of Rigo and the others to the top of the city wall, they saw a thin silver-gray line on the horizon to the east of Icestone City. As time passed, this thin line gradually spread out and finally covered the wilderness to the east of Icestone City. The bright red thorn flag rustled in the cold wind. That was the insignia of the Miller family and also the new symbol of the half-elf royal family. Colin frowned slightly and thought, Queen Aisha couldn't have come personally, could she? Although if Aisha came, she would definitely be a great help to Colin. He hoped that she could stay in Silver Moon City and take care of her baby. Under Colin's gaze, a small group of cavalry broke out from the Silver Moon Guard's formation and quickly rushed towards Icestone City. When they arrived at Icestone City, the city gates just happened to open and a group of black cavalry soldiers came out to welcome them. The half-elf general in the lead immediately dismounted and knelt on one knee, loudly saying, "Honorable Viscount Angley, under the orders of Her Majesty the Queen, the 30,000 warriors of the Silver Moon Guard are gathered here and are at your command. Duke Modwin, welcome to Icestone City." When Colin first saw William Modwin, he was a little surprised, but he quickly understood the intentions of Queen Aisha's arrangements. Letting this former half-elf prince become the commander of the Silver Moon Guard was indeed a good idea. The current mid-level generals of the Silver Moon Guard were all members of the Miller family. Under the circumstances where Queen Aisha was pregnant and couldn't come, if another member of the Miller family was sent to be the commander, then he might not wholeheartedly follow Colin's orders. Especially when Colin needed the Silver Moon Guard to make a certain sacrifice. Duke Modwin was different. He was an honest man and was easy to control. Moreover, under the circumstances where the mid-level generals of the Silver Moon Guard were all members of the Miller family, If Duke Modwin didn't want to be a mere figurehead, then he had to obtain Colin's support. In this way, the Silver Moon Guard would be more convenient for Colin to completely control. Duke Modwin followed Colin into the city and walked all the way to the Red Fort. At the same time, he reported the situation of the reinforcements. "Sir Viscounts, this time I brought a total of 30,000 Silver Moon Guard, 10,000 archers, 7,000 spearmen, 8,000 sword and shield soldiers, 2,000 shield soldiers, and 3,000 light cavalry soldiers. In addition, there are 38 knights and 15 rangers accompanying the army." "Well, very good." Colin nodded in satisfaction. With the support of the Silver Moon Guard, he was now more confident. The 3,000 light cavalry soldiers will be incorporated into the Black Cavalry and be under the command of Knight Roger. "Yes, sir." In the face of Colin's first order, Duke Modwin didn't hesitate to agree. Even if this order was obviously to take over the cavalry troops of the Silver Moon Guard. "Are Her Majesty the Queen and Miss Vera doing well?" "Her Majesty is in good health. As for Miss Vera..." Duke Modwin suddenly turned his head to look at one of the attendants behind him. Colin also turned his head in confusion, but he saw that the attendant slowly took off her helmet, revealing a beautiful smile. It was Vera. "Vera, why did you run?" Before Colin could finish his words, Vera threw herself into his arms like a swallow returning to its nest. Feeling the warm and soft touch and the familiar fragrance, Colin smiled and said, "Why didn't you tell me in advance that you were coming to Ice Stone City?" Vera buried her head in Colin's arms and said in a muffled voice, "Don't you welcome me?" "Of course not." Colin laughed and said, "The door of the Red Fort will always be open to you." When Duke Modwin and the others saw this, they all quietly stepped back to a distance, allowing the two lovers who had not seen each other for a long time to say goodbye. Chapter 190. Early in the morning, Colin woke up from his dream. The fireplace was still burning and making a crackling sound. The girl's body temperature and fragrance still lingered on the bed, but she was no longer there. "Good morning, Colin." Colin sat up and saw Vera sitting by the dressing table in front of the window. The most beautiful flower in the house of St. Hilda had already changed into a bright yellow crochet dress. She was facing the mirror and pasting a rose gold ornament on her forehead. "Good morning, Vera." Colin looked at Vera, who was not far away, with appreciation. In his opinion, the girl seemed to have matured a lot after not seeing her for a long time. Her blue and pure eyes were beautiful, and the makeup on her face was even more gorgeous and charming than usual. The bright red lip gloss made her perfect outline look even more three-dimensional. Although there was still a trace of the shyness of a delicate young girl, there was more of a natural and graceful elegance and solemnity, as well as a gradually blossoming charm. "Do I look good?" After Vera finished dressing up, she turned around and smiled at Colin. The sunlight outside the window was very good, and the rays of light shone in and fell on the girl's body, reflecting a faint halo. "Of course, your beauty is overshadowed by the warm winter sun." Colin smiled and flattered her. Vera rolled her eyes cutely, as if she felt that Colin's praise was too exaggerated. "This is what Queen Aisha taught me." The girl lifted the hem of her dress and twirled in a circle. Colin thought that it was no wonder. He felt that this dress was a little familiar, and it was not Vera's usual style. "It seems that you have learned a lot during the time you were in Silver Moon City." Queen Aisha also told me about her past. After listening to her story, I realized that I am actually very lucky compared to her. After saying that, Vera stretched out her hands to Colin and motioned for him to hug her. Colin stepped forward with a smile and hugged the girl through her thin dress. At this time, he finally understood that the reason why Vera was able to walk out of the shadow of her past was all thanks to Queen Aisha's persuasion. She was such a sweet lover. "I've sent someone to Winter Castle to request the Duke of St. Hilda to marry you. It won't be long before you can officially become the mistress of the Red Castle." She didn't know if it was because of the man's words or because of the warm embrace, but the girl's body gradually became soft and her whole body sank into Colin's embrace. "Colin, even if my adoptive father does not agree to our marriage, I will never leave you," Vera said firmly. Colin smiled with relief and tightened his grip on the girl's soft and slender waist. He promised, "Don't worry, I will make the Duke agree to our marriage. Their marriage had to be approved by the Duke. Otherwise, Vera would be eloping with him. This was obviously not a result that Colin, who had greater ambitions, was willing to accept. However, judging from the current situation, the Duke of St. Hilda really didn't seem to be willing to marry Vera to Colin. The messenger from Icestone City had been waiting in Winter Castle for more than 2 months, but he still hadn't received an audience with the Duke. Therefore, Colin took advantage of Baron Lomba's provocation and sent the Baron's son to Winter Castle to test if the Duke of St. Hilda was seriously injured and couldn't receive guests, or if he was purposely delaying the meeting with the messenger from Icestone City. If the Duke really met with the Lomba family but didn't see the messenger from Icestone City, then Colin would have to reformulate his next plan. If you don't want to give it to me, then I'll snatch it from you. Feeling some changes in the man's body, Vera suddenly struggled out of Colin's embrace and changed the topic. Colin, are you hungry? Let's go eat breakfast. Okay, Colin smiled mischievously, understanding that the girl probably still hadn't recovered from last night's madness. With Vera's help, Colin quickly got dressed and walked to the dining room together. After a sumptuous breakfast, Vera suggested that they go to Icestone City for a stroll, and Colin naturally didn't object. Today was a rare day of good weather. The warm sun hung high in the sky, dispelling some of the winter's cold. Colin and Vera walked hand in hand on the streets of Icestone City, but they didn't cause too much of a commotion. This wasn't because the people of Icestone City were disrespectful to their lord, but because Colin and Vera deliberately hid their identities. Colin wore a wide triangular hat that covered most of his face, and Vera wore a black veil, returning to her appearance when Colin first met her. The guards followed the two of them from afar, but they didn't make a big fuss. Colin, the slaves in your territory are a little different from the ones I saw before. How are they different? Vera tilted her head and looked at the slaves who were concentrating on their work. She said, the slaves I saw in Cold Winter City were all lazy. If they didn't have the whip of the overseer, they would rather lie on the ground and bask in the sun for the whole day. However, the slaves in your territory are different. Even if they don't have the whip, they are still very motivated. Do you know the reason for this? Vera pondered for a moment and shook her head, indicating that she didn't understand. Because I gave them hope. Hope? Colin told Vera about the point system that he implemented in Icestone City. Vera thought for a moment and nodded. It is indeed a great idea. However, Colin, aren't you worried that the number of slaves in your hands will decrease? 10 places per month, and only 120 free people will be produced in a year. Chapter 191. In this magical medieval world, knowledge was a precious treasure. Not to mention slaves, even civilians generally did not have the opportunity to come into contact with such wealth. Naturally, the nobles did not have to worry about this. Their castles had a large number of books, and there were also private tutors who were responsible for the education of the nobles. However, it was very difficult for the civilians to learn. There were 2 main ways for them to master knowledge. The first way was through the church. The churches in various places would set up schools for the civilians to study. However, the children here would basically learn theological knowledge. In addition to being taught a lot of principles on how to serve God and why to serve God, it was basically impossible for them to learn much useful knowledge in daily life. The second way was through the nobles. Yes, the nobles would also recruit some civilian children to accompany their own children. However, such a quota was very rare. Normally, it would only be left to the descendants of the retainers. After these descendants of the retainers grasped the knowledge, they would be able to better serve their lord. In fact, there was a third way, and that was the Empire's White Tower Academy. However, this way was very difficult for the nobles to come into contact with, let alone the civilians. This was because the White Tower Academy's admission requirements were very simple and harsh. It did not look at identity, but only looked at talent. Only talented children, regardless of whether they were nobles or civilians, could enter the White Tower Academy to study for free. However, there was only one White Tower Academy in the entire Empire of Light, and the number of students admitted every year was less than 2 digits. Therefore, most of the civilians would be illiterate their whole life, not to mention the slaves. However, this might be what the rulers wanted to see. The first pope of the Empire of Light, His Holiness Peter Messer, had a famous saying, "It is easier to fill an ignorant mind with loyalty and faith." Only the ignorant civilians and slaves would be able to facilitate the rule of the church and the nobles. Bishop Emeritus, do you think that I should not let people teach these slaves knowledge? Colin was not worried that his behavior would cause dissatisfaction with the church. After all, the church did not explicitly prohibit this. Of course, this was because generally, no lord would teach knowledge to the slaves. "No, my lord, I have no right to interfere with how you govern the people in your territory." The Bishop Emeritus bowed to Colin and said with a smile. After that, he bowed to Vera, and it was obvious that he had recognized her identity. Colin's eyes flashed. He was not too surprised that the emeritus bishop could recognize him. After all, he had dealt with him many times. Moreover, his disguise was not very tight. However, how did the emeritus bishop recognize Vera? How did he know that Vera had come to Icestone City? Therefore, Jiang Yuning was afraid that one of the servants in the Red Castle might have leaked the news of Vera's arrival to the church. Although Colin did not deliberately hide the fact that Vera was in Icestone City, the feeling of being surrounded by so many people still made Colin feel extremely uncomfortable. However, he did not have any good ideas for the church at the moment. Faith, to the people of this world, was an extremely serious matter. If they had to choose between a lord and a deity, most of the people would choose the deity. The nobles could only accept this helplessly. When they were in Silvermoon City, Colin deliberately planted the seed of hatred for the church in Prince Harrison's heart. In addition to finding some trouble for the San Lorenzo family, he also wanted to use this opportunity to test the true strength of the church. When Vera saw this, she had no choice but to lift her skirt and bow in return. She then asked in a crisp voice, "Bishop Emeritus, why did you say that knowledge can also be a curse?" "Miss Vera, for you, of course, knowledge will not be a curse. However, for these lowly slaves, knowledge can make them more aware of their own situation and thus fall into the abyss of despair. If this is not a curse, then what is it?" Vera was silent. Colin sneered in his heart. It was obviously a trick to fool the people, but in the words of the bishop, it seemed to be a kind of humane concern. It was as if not letting the slaves come into contact with knowledge could save them from suffering. Although Colin was complaining in his heart, on the surface, he pretended to be enlightened. "Ah, Bishop, you are right. Fortunately, you reminded me. Otherwise, I am afraid that I would have done something bad. Lord Viscounts, you are too serious." When the Bishop Emeritus saw that the young lord had taken the initiative to admit his mistake, he had a look on his face. "In fact, there is nothing wrong with your approach. It is not impossible for these slave children to learn how to read, but please do not forget to spread the glory of the Lord to them." Colin finally understood the true intention of the Bishop Emeritus. He wanted to brainwash these slave children. In fact, when Colin arranged for the teachers to teach these slave children literacy, he deliberately omitted the related content of theology. Instead, he replaced it with more content about who gave them food to eat, who gave them the opportunity to learn, and so on. He wanted to instill the concept of loyalty to the Lord in these slave children. Unexpectedly, the church was still aware of it. Of course, it is only right for these slaves to bask in the glory of the Lord. Colin smiled as usual. "Very well, I will arrange for a few priests to come and assist you in teaching these slave children. Thank you, Bishop, for your help." Colin could only nod in agreement. Although he was wary of the church, Colin would not provoke them at this time. He hoped that Prince Harrison of the San Lorenzo family could become the hero charging at the front lines against the church, while he himself could just wave the flag and shout from behind. Seeing that his goal was achieved, the Bishop Emeritus nodded in satisfaction, then said, "Lord, there is something else I want to tell you. Please tell me. Next month I will be transferred out of Icestone City. However, don't worry, there will be a new bishop to take over my position." "Where will you be transferred to?" "Chilly Winter City." A ripple appeared in the Bishop Emeritus' eyes. "Then I must congratulate you." Colin smiled. Compared to the Bishop of Icestone City, The Bishop of Chilly Winter City was clearly a promotion. The Bishop Emeritus also smiled humbly, but the joy on his face could not be concealed. The Bishop of Chilly Winter City was also a popular candidate for the Archbishop of the Northern Frontier Diocese. Therefore, this Bishop Emeritus was only one step away from stepping into the true core of the Church. "I wonder where Bishop Zion has been transferred to?" Vera suddenly asked. The Zion she spoke of was the former Bishop of Chilly Winter City. The Bishop Emeritus had a sorrowful expression and sighed. "Bishop Zion has returned to the embrace of the Lord." Vera was shocked and hurriedly expressed her apologies and condolences. However, Colin keenly saw a trace of unnaturalness on the Bishop Emeritus' face, so he asked, "May I ask, how did Bishop Zion pass away?" "From what I know, Bishop Zion passed away due to illness." "Passed away due to illness? At this time?" Colin was certain that there was something fishy about Bishop Zion's death. Thinking about it carefully, the Duke of St. Hilda was injured in the duel with the Troll Paladins, so the one who treated him was most likely this Bishop Zion. However, he passed away at this time? What secrets were hidden in this? What was the situation in Chilly Winter City? One question after another appeared in Colin's mind, causing him to unconsciously fall into a daze. Chapter 192. It was already the middle of March, and they could already vaguely feel the arrival of spring. For the northern frontier where the winter was exceptionally long, spring seemed to have come a little early this year. Perhaps the merciful God could not bear to see the famine continue to wreak havoc, and he intended to bring forward the spring planting. However, even if the crops were planted now, they would have to wait until autumn to harvest the crops. Therefore, the famine was destined to take more lives in the northern frontier. It was also destined to cause more turmoil. "Chaos is a ladder." Colin read the letter in his hand with a playful expression on his face. "Is that all?" Vera asked curiously when she saw that Colin had stopped reading the letter. The two of them were enjoying their breakfast at this time when Eamon suddenly handed them a letter that he had just received. The letter was from Iron Furnace City, and it was obvious that it was written by Marquis Dawson. "Yes, that's all." Colin sneered as he crumpled the letter into a ball and threw it into the fireplace. The flames flickered for a moment before calming down. "Marquis Dawson must be trying to win you over, right?" Vera asked as she sipped her milk. Her heart was stirred up by the letter. "I think so." Colin looked at Vera, who was a little pale, and reached out his hand to hold her cold little hand. He comforted her. "Don't worry, I will cut off the head of this shameless dwarf who betrayed your father with my own hands." Vera nodded as she held Colin's hand. She felt a little relieved. Colin continued to eat the food on his plate as he thought about the words in Marquis Dawson's letter. Perhaps, as the winter was about to end, the turmoil in the northern frontier would gradually begin. After breakfast, Colin was about to take Vera to the garden for a walk. However, Eamon suddenly walked over and said, "Master, the messenger from the northern frontier is here again." "The northern frontier?" Colin was stunned for a moment before he understood who Eamon was talking about. Wasn't this his future brother-in-law? "Bring him to my study room." "Yes, master." After that, Colin turned around and looked at Vera before he said, "Your brother is here. Do you want to meet him?" "Charles?" Vera was taken aback, but soon after, her small face wrinkled up as if she was very conflicted. "If you don't want to see him, then don't. I'm afraid he sneaked back this time. It's not appropriate for you to see him." "Okay, then you go ahead. I'll go to the garden by myself." "Okay, I'll come find you later." Sir Charles, welcome to Icestone City again." "Viscount Angley, thank you for your hospitality." When he saw Charles again, his attitude towards Colin was still as respectful as before. It was as if he had forgotten that he was once the first successor of the Dukes of the North. Colin invited Charles to take a seat with a smile and asked the maid to bring coffee and pastries. However, Charles seemed to be in a hurry. After taking a sip of coffee, he asked directly, "Viscount Angley, have you considered my suggestion from last time?" Colin's heart trembled. He knew that Charles was still hung up on his suggestion to attack the giant Demon King city. "Charles, without the Duke's orders, I wouldn't dare to attack the giant demon empire without permission." Viscount Angley, you're not attacking without permission. You're being forced to counterattack. What do you mean? When I returned from the front lines this time, the giant demon empire had already sent 100,000 troops south. They'll probably reach Icestone City in a month or so. Colin's heart skipped a beat. The giant demons really sent out their troops? Charles said solemnly, "It's absolutely true. Viscount Angley, the giant demons have sent 100,000 troops south this time. It can be said that they've used up all of their resources. Right now, the giant demon empire's internal defenses are basically useless. As long as you lead an elite cavalry, you'll be able to easily take down the giant demon king city and make a great contribution." Seeing that Colin was still hesitating, Charles tried to persuade him again. "Viscount Angley, I know that you've received help from the half-elven kingdom. With the Silver Moon Guard helping you defend Icestone City, you don't have to worry about your rear being unstable even if you move the Black Cavalry away. Since that's the case, why don't you take a gamble with me?" Colin rolled his eyes in his mind. "Of course you're willing to take a gamble. You don't have to pay the stakes anyway." "Charles, although your plan does move me, I still need to ask the Duke." "Then it'll be too late." Charles was a little anxious. "Viscount Angley, the giant demon army had already moved out before I left. If you ask Winter City for instructions, the giant demons might have already approached Icestone City. At that time, how are you going to send troops to ambush the giant demon king city? Doesn't the Golden Lion army have 3 fortresses at the front lines? Can't they delay the giant demon army?" The fortresses Colin spoke of were actually the 3 fortresses that Prince Okamoto had given to the Duke of St. Hilda during Vera's coming-of-age ceremony. The giant demon king city was surrounded by snowy mountains. There were only 3 main paths that could allow an army to pass through, and these 3 fortresses just happened to be at the crucial points of these 3 paths. "Viscount Angley, do you know how many troops the Golden Lion army has stationed in these 3 fortresses?" Charles's face was full of helplessness. "How many?" 3,000. 3,000 in total? "Yes. And most of them are new recruits." Colin was speechless. The Golden Lion army had only stationed so few people in such an important military location. How could they possibly stop the giant demon army? Colin suddenly realized that the Duke of St. Hilda might have purposely given up on these 3 fortresses. Firstly, the Golden Lion army needed to concentrate their forces to deal with the internal rebellion. Secondly, the Duke of St. Hilda might have purposely lured the giant demons out. If that was the case, my apologies, Charles. Without the Duke's orders, I will not send troops. Colin's attitude suddenly became abnormally firm. Charles looked at Colin's resolute eyes. After a while, he finally shook his head and sighed. "Colin, have you guessed something?" Colin also smiled. "Charles, you should have met the Duke, right?" This time, Charles didn't deny it. He nodded and said, "Yes. Since it has come to this, I won't hide it from you. This ambush plan was actually devised by Father." As expected, Colin sneered in his heart. As expected, the Duke of St. Hilda wanted to use him. However, in the current situation, it would be too naive of him to think that he would send troops just because of Charles's provocative words and illusory achievements. Colin naturally understood that he had to send troops. This wasn't just because of the Duke of St. Hilda's orders. It was because once the giant demon army approached the northern frontier, Icestone City would very likely become their first target. However, the Duke of St. Hilda shouldn't think that he could make Colin work for him without paying a price. "Charles, since this is the Duke's order, I will definitely follow it. However, the messenger I sent to Coldwinter City has already waited for more than 2 months, and the Duke still hasn't received an audience. This kind of behavior really makes me disappointed. Viscount Angley, of course Father knows that you want to marry Vera. He actually approves of this marriage. Therefore, as long as you are willing to send troops to attack the giant Demon King city, he will definitely receive your messenger." Did the Duke really say that? "Of course, I swear to you in the name of the holy ancestors of the House of St. Hilda. As long as you lead the army to attack the giant Demon King city, Vera will definitely marry into the Angeli family." Colin stared into Charles's eyes. After a long time, he finally nodded. "Good. In 3 days I will send troops to attack the giant Demon King city. Chapter 193. Under the dim candlelight, 3 people were sitting at the long table in the Red Castle's dining hall. Colin, Vera, and the future brother-in-law Charles. After thinking about it, Vera decided to meet her brother. Although she was now disgusted with her adoptive father, she still had some feelings for her brother. However, after learning about Colin and Charles's plan, Vera was no longer in the mood to catch up with her brother. Instead, she began to worry about Colin's safety. As Charles's identity still needed to be kept a secret, there were no other attendants in the dining hall. The butler, Eamon, was serving them personally. After quietly finishing their meal, Eamon brought 3 desserts. However, Vera was obviously not in the mood to enjoy the desserts now. She looked up at Colin and asked, "Colin, are you really not willing to take me with you? I am a mage and I can be of great help to you on the battlefield." Colin held Vera's little hand and smiled, "No need. Our surprise attack this time depends on the element of surprise. There should not be any hard battles. Moreover, I need you to help me guard Icestone City. In case the northern frontier becomes chaotic, there must be someone I trust here who is of sufficient status to take charge." Charles also smiled and persuaded, "Vera, you should stay in Icestone City with peace of mind. It is already inappropriate for you to sneak into the Red Castle. If you are abducted to the Blue Ice Field now, I am afraid that Father will punish Viscount Angley when he finds out." In the face of Charles's teasing, Vera reluctantly pulled out a polite smile. The Duke's eldest son obviously did not know what Vera had experienced in Silvermoon City. He thought that the adoptive father and daughter were still as close as before. Colin did not expose him and looked at everything in front of him with a smile. He was thinking about when to tell Charles that his biological father had sold him out in order to create an opportunity for the Black Cavalry to destroy the Troll army. If Charles knew that the suffering he had suffered was actually caused by his own father, that scene. It would be very interesting. He wouldn't have another filial son, would he? Just as Colin was thinking about how he should deal with the Duke and his son, Vera's clear voice sounded again. "By the way, Colin, isn't there a paladin prince in the giant demon empire? If he's in the Troll King city? Don't worry, my good sister." Charles smiled and comforted him. This Saint Samurai prince was seriously injured in the battle with his father. He has already returned to the extreme north to recuperate. In his current state, if he dares to appear in the giant Devil Royal City, then perhaps we'll have an extremely dazzling addition to our list of achievements. Colin suddenly thought of something and asked, "I heard that it is very difficult to injure a Saint Realm expert, but once injured, it will be extremely troublesome?" That's right. The body of a Saint-level combatant was vastly different from that of an ordinary person. They already possessed a trace of divinity. But because of this, if their bodies were to be harmed, they would need to repair this trace of divinity. However, condensing divinity in the mortal world is extremely difficult. Therefore, once a Saint-level combatant is injured, it will be very difficult for them to completely recover without 2 or 3 years. Colin nodded and asked in a casual tone, "Then what about the Duke of St. Hilda? Is his injury also very serious?" Father's injury is indeed somewhat troublesome." Charles sighed, then smiled and comforted him. "However, you don't have to worry too much. The church has already sent a cardinal to Chilly Winter to personally treat Father's injury." Hearing this, Colin suddenly thought of the honorary bishop who was about to go to Chilly Winter to take up a post, as well as Bishop Jean, who was said to have passed away due to illness. "That's good." Colin smiled as if he was finally relieved. In the morning 3 days later, a low bugle horn sounded in the outskirts of Icestone City. Teams of cavalry urged their mounts and set off on their journey to the north under the orders of their officers. For this surprise attack on the Troll King city, Colin mobilized a total of 11,000 pure cavalry soldiers. Among them were 6,000 black cavalry soldiers, 3,000 Silvermoon Guard soldiers, and 2,000 new recruits that Knight Charles had trained in Icestone City in the past year. There was no need to doubt the battle strength of the black cavalry veterans, but the battle strength of the Silvermoon Guard soldiers and the new recruits of Icestone City was somewhat worrying. However, Colin still brought them along. After all, if they did not experience the test of blood and fire, these new recruits would never be able to become true elites. As for the Silver Moon Guards cavalry, Colin hoped that they could be integrated into the Black Cavalry system. This surprise attack on the Troll King city was a good opportunity to let these half-elves experience the battle style of the Black Cavalry. At the top of Icestone City's walls, Colin once again reminded Steward Aemon and Knight Charles. He would be accompanying the army this time, so Charles and Aemon would be in charge of the military and political affairs in the territory. One of them was the old steward of the Angeli family, and the other was Colin's blood descendant, so he naturally did not have to worry about their loyalty. Moreover, their abilities were also quite outstanding. With them guarding the rear, Colin was very assured. In the end, Colin reluctantly said goodbye to Vera. Although the girl was very reluctant, she still revealed a bright smile in order not to worry Colin. It was like a plum blossom blooming in the middle of winter. "When you return in triumph, I will marry you." Colin looked at the girl's beautiful smile in front of him, and his chest instantly filled with pride. He laughed loudly. "Okay." The two of them did not deliberately lower their voices, so everyone around them heard it. The retainers of the Angeli family naturally revealed motherly smiles, happy for their lord. Vera's identity was noble enough, so of course she was worthy of Colin. Moreover, this was the bloodline of the Paladin family. If she really married Colin, then the Angeli family would be considered as a high-ranking noble family in the Empire of Light. Viscounts would definitely not be the end of the Angeli family. If another Paladin appeared in the future, then the entire political landscape of the Empire of Light would undergo a drastic change. Of course, the probability of this happening was extremely small. The birth of a Paladin was very difficult. From the historical records of the Empire of Light, almost all of the Paladin powerhouses were the descendants of Paladin parents. Therefore, the 5 major Paladin families of the Empire of Light liked to intermarry. Of course, it was not impossible to have a Paladin descendant if only one of the parents had the bloodline of the Paladin. However, in the few cases, the father was a member of the Paladin family. Only the mother was a member of the Paladin family. There had never been a case of a Paladin descendant. Maybe the Angeli family could break this record. Only Charles had a speechless expression on his face, and he wanted to remind his sister to be more reserved. "Let's go," Colin ordered, and tens of thousands of cavalrymen suddenly surged and rushed towards the ice field in the north. The sound of the horses' hooves was like rolling thunder, shaking the wilderness. The flags fluttered in the air, guiding the direction of the cavalrymen's march. Vera stood on top of the city wall, looking at the dense cavalrymen heading north. In addition to being worried about Colin's safety, she was also full of pride. How could the trolls and rats be a match for such a strong northern frontier army? Chapter 194. At the end of March, the situation at the northern frontier was not optimistic. As the weather gradually turned warmer, a group of ambitious people seemed to be ready for action. The lords of the northern frontier all smelled the scent of war and began to gather their troops to strengthen the city's defenses. Although the lords should be actively preparing for spring plowing so that the worsening famine would not continue to spread, the current situation was not ideal. Unfortunately, the weak situation at the northern frontier made it impossible for the lords to care about spring plowing. Moreover, if the slaves and civilians starved to death, the lords would naturally be more concerned about the safety of their own territories. Finally, on the first day of April, a man who claimed to be a descendant of the House of St. Theon officially announced his identity in Ironforge City. At the same time, he claimed that it was the Duke of St. Hilda's incompetence that led to the unprecedented famine at the northern frontier. Therefore, as a descendant of the Paladin family, he spoke up for the countless people of the northern frontier who were suffering from the famine. He asked the Duke of St. Hilda to voluntarily give up his title of Lord of the Northern Frontier and let someone more capable take on the responsibility of protecting the northern frontier. After Mr. Theon's public statement, a group of northern frontier nobles led by Marquis Dawson and Earl Ullman also publicly announced that they wanted the Duke of St. Hilda to take responsibility for the famine at the northern frontier. the sudden return of the House of St. Theon, who had been silent for 300 years, completely stirred up the situation at the northern frontier. While the lords of the northern frontier were stunned, they began to consider which side to take. As for the people of the northern frontier, with the reputation of the House of St. Hilda for thousands of years, the people of the northern frontier naturally did not care about the House of St. Theon. In fact, many people had already forgotten about this paladin family. However, the famine that had ravaged the northern frontier for half a year had accumulated a lot of dissatisfaction with the House of St. Hilda. Now that the House of St. Theon had ignited this dissatisfaction, it instantly became a prairie fire. Countless people in the northern frontier who didn't have enough to eat began to think that perhaps it was time for the northern frontier to change masters. In the face of House St. Herd's public attack, Duke St. Hilda finally appeared in public. This was also his first public appearance since his duel with the Saint Samurai. The Lord of the Northern Frontier unceremoniously launched a counterattack, refuting the absurd remarks of the House of St. Theon and claiming that they were the culprits of the chaos in the Northern Frontier. At the same time, he announced that Marquis Dawson, Earl Amon, and the other lords of the Northern Frontier were traitors and decided to immediately strip them of their titles and fiefs. He also sent the Golden Lion Legion to Ironforge City in an attempt to eliminate the Dwarven Rebellion. In addition, the Duke of St. Hilda also issued an emergency conscription order, requesting all the lords and mercenary groups in the northern frontier to join the war against the dwarves. In an instant, the northern frontier was in turmoil, and the War of the Lion and the Tiger had officially begun. Just as the northern frontier was in chaos, Colin had already led his army to the snowy mountains. Here, the cold wind howled and snow covered the sky. There was no sign of spring at all. If they went any further, even if they officially entered the territory of the Troll Empire, Colin and the others would no longer be able to hide their tracks. Of course, in order to enter the Troll Empire, they still had to pass through a final barrier. Lord Viscount Angley, Sir Charles, a weather-beaten knight of the House of St. Hilda, was brought to the temporary command post and bowed to Colin and Charles. He wore a full set of chainmail with the insignia of the Golden Lion Legion on his chest. He had a knight's sword and kite shield at his waist, and a conical helmet in his left hand. The various cuts and bloodstains on his equipment showed that he had recently experienced a bloody battle. "Knight Brad, what's the situation at Gale Castle?" Charles asked anxiously. The Gale Castle he spoke of was one of the 3 castles that the Troll Empire had given to the Golden Lion Legion. It was also the castle that Charles had served in before. Colin could only truly enter the territory of the Troll Empire after passing through this castle. This Knight Brad was the commander of the garrison that guarded Gale Castle. The Troll army south arrived at Gale Castle 13 days ago and launched an attack on us. Our army defended for a day, but the Trolls still managed to take over Gale Castle in the end. After Gale Castle fell, I led the remaining troops out and hid in the snowy mountains, waiting for reinforcements. How many people do you have now? When we retreated, there were more than 500 people, but some of them got separated. Now, there are only about 200 people left. Knight Brad's expression was gloomy. Colin obviously understood that the separated that Knight Brad was talking about was actually escaping. However, these people could not be blamed for becoming deserters. After all, this place was too far from the northern frontier, and reinforcements seemed to be out of reach. Furthermore, most of the garrison were new recruits, so it was not unusual for them to escape in despair. The Trolls left after taking over Gale Castle? Yes, they only rested in Gale Castle for half a day before hurriedly heading south. Colin calculated the time and realized that he should have just brushed shoulders with the Troll army that was heading south. This was actually very normal. The Firmament Icefield was so big that it was normal for 2 armies to brush shoulders. It was rare for them to bump into each other head-on. What about the other 2 castles? 2 days ago, I saw smoke rising in the direction of the other 2 castles. So, they should have been taken over by the Trolls. Colin nodded. He was not surprised. The Golden Lion Legion had only placed so few troops here. Obviously, they did not intend to hold on. What's the situation in Gale Castle now? Do you know?
Yes.
The trolls did not leave too many troops to guard it. I estimate that there are only about 1 or 2,000 of them, and the defense is extremely lax. I even tried to sneak up to less than 100 meters away from the castle to observe at night, but it did not attract the attention of the guards. Well, do you have any suggestions on how to attack Gale Castle? Knight Brad laughed when he heard this question. Charles laughed too. He looked at Knight Brad and explained, Viscount Angley, when the troll army first mobilized, we realized that Gale Castle would definitely fall. So, in order to make it easier for us to come back in the future, we did something to the walls of the castle. Colin's eyes lit up. He hurriedly asked, What did you do? In the southeast corner of Gale Castle, the foundation of a section of the wall has been deliberately hollowed out by us. So, now, we only need to hit it a few times with black wood and it will collapse. Good. Colin clapped his hands excitedly. He then ordered, Knight Brad, please lead your men to prepare the siege equipment. When the sun rises tomorrow morning, we will attack. Chapter 195. Cam was a warrior of the 4th rank. Similar to the human knights, the troll race's warrior profession was usually reserved for the nobles. However, warrior Cam was still a mercenary. This was rather unusual. This was because most nobles were more willing to fight for glory than for money. But Cam was an anomaly. He liked money more. When he was still Baron Cam, in order to get more taxes, he raised the tax rate in his territory to a shocking 9 out of 10. It could be imagined that Baron Carm's citizens would soon run away because they couldn't bear such exploitation. Then, Cam was determined by the Troll Emperor to have no management ability and was stripped of his title and territory. From then on, Baron Carm became Captain Carm. The Tush mercenary band he established was rather famous in the Troll Empire. They had close to 2,000 members and most of them were lunatics like Cam who valued money over their lives. This time, Cam received another mission, to guard the Howling Wind Castle. Letting a mercenary band guard a military stronghold at the Empire's border sounded a bit unreliable. Many mercenary bands had many members and many experts, but if they really met an elite army, they would only be wantonly slaughtered. Because of this, many more powerful troll mercenary bands rejected this mission. Only Cam, who valued money over his life, accepted it. Moreover, this troll warrior who talked about money even asked the military representative who issued the mission if the Tush mercenary band killed an invading enemy in the process of guarding the Howling Wind Castle, would there be additional rewards? Hearing this, the military representative had a strange expression, but he still promised Cam that for every enemy they killed, they would exchange their heads for 10 gold coins. 10 gold coins for 1 head. Cam heard this reward and his eyes turned red with excitement. He nodded and agreed to the deal. However, when Cam rubbed his hands and led the Tush mercenary band into the Howling Wind Castle, he was shocked to find that there were no traces of the enemy. In the first few days, the Tush mercenary band was very serious about patrolling. However, after a few days of peace, the mercenary band's lax nature was exposed. Drinking, slacking off, fighting over female slaves. In short, the whole Howling Wind Castle was in a mess because of the Tush mercenary group. Facing such a situation, Cam didn't care because in his opinion, it was fine as long as his mercenaries could kill. As for discipline, what the hell was that? The only thing that made the mercenary leader anxious was that the enemy had yet to appear. But soon, Commander Cam's dream came true. Early in the morning, there was a loud bang, and the entire Howling Wind Castle seemed to be shaken by a giant hand. Cam woke up with a start from his sleep. Just as he was wondering what had happened, he heard his subordinates shouting, "Enemy attack! Enemy attack!" This time, instead of being shocked, Cam was overjoyed. His eyes shone with a golden light. He quickly put on his chainmail, picked up his machete, and rushed out while shouting, "Brothers, kill! The chance to make a lot of money is here." Outside the Howling Wind Castle, Colin was overjoyed when he saw that Knight Brad had really knocked down a section of the wall with a few logs. He immediately ordered Knight Roger to lead the army into the city. Although he knew that the narrow terrain of the castle wasn't suitable for cavalry, he couldn't care less at this time. If they couldn't even take down the Howling Wind Castle, Then what was the point of talking about the Troll King city? They might as well just go back home. Knight Roger estimated the size of the gap in the wall and arranged 10 groups of cavalry, each group of 200 people, to charge into the city in batches. But before the first group of cavalry could charge, they saw the defenders of the Howling Wind Castle rushing out from the gap in the wall. What's going on? Knight Roger was confused. Knight Brad, who was at the foot of the wall, saw the troll soldiers rushing towards them and quickly led his men back. After running for some distance, Knight Brad looked back and was shocked to find that the troll soldiers were chasing after them. What's going on? Knight Brad was also dumbfounded. Didn't you see that we have cavalry? Why didn't you use the castle's terrain and come out to fight with cavalry? This isn't a trap, right? Colin saw the situation and was also confused. Why don't we test the waters? Knight Roger suggested. Alright, when the trolls rush out a little more, send the cavalry to kill them, but don't charge into the city. Deal with the trolls outside the city first. Yes. Kill. The trolls chased after Knight Brad and the others, roaring and cursing, as if they were angry that these humans ran too fast and caused them to lose so many gold coins. At this time, Kem also rushed out of the Howling Wind Castle. This captain of the Tusk mercenary group was indeed not cut out for war. Of course, a mercenary group's battle was very different from a regular army's battle. But to be honest, Cam's brain wasn't very good. Which lord with a normal brain would set a tax rate of 9 out of 10, but at least there were some normal people around him. Captain, we can't charge anymore. We don't know the enemy's situation. If we rush out like this, what if the enemy is too strong? Bullsh *T. Cam glared and scolded. War depends on courage. If we don't even dare to charge, then what's the point of fighting? It seemed to make sense, but in the next second, Cam regretted it. Dong dong dong. The ground suddenly began to tremble, and 2 cavalry units appeared on both sides of the Tusk mercenary group. They stuck close to the trolls' formation, and like a pair of large hands, they hugged the trolls that rushed out. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, arrows rained down on the trolls' formation. Counterattack! Counterattack! Cam was furious. He roared and ordered his mercenaries to counterattack with arrows. But in the wilderness outside the city, there was too much space for the cavalry to move around. They maintained their high speed, and after shooting a wave of arrows, they immediately pulled away to avoid the trolls' counterattack. Then, when the trolls' arrow rain thinned out, they would approach again and shoot another wave of arrows. Because they were worried that this was a trap, the Black Cavalry's attack method was still very conservative. They didn't use a frontal assault, but instead used a harassment tactic, patiently cutting off the trolls' flesh bit by bit. In fact, Colin was still too careful. These troll mercenaries who didn't have heavy shields and didn't have a tight formation couldn't possibly withstand a frontal assault from the Black Cavalry. As time passed, Knight Roger gradually came to his senses. These trolls were a group of scattered soldiers, and couldn't even set up a basic military formation. They probably weren't a proper army. After receiving the report, Colin helplessly shook his head. Sigh, it seems that the Troll Empire's internal defenses are really weak. Let's quickly end this battle. Chapter 196. The night deepened, and the silver moon hung high in the sky. The battle at the Gale Castle had already ended. The Tusk mercenary group, who valued money over their lives, had lost both their money and their lives. After quietly turning a few surviving troll warriors into blood thralls, Colin climbed to the top of the watchtower. In the howling cold wind, Charles was leaning on the fence, looking north. What are you looking at? Colin stepped forward and stood side by side with Charles. Viscount Angley. Charles bowed slightly to Colin, then smiled and said, I'm looking at the Troll King city. Just call me Colin. Colin smiled and waved his hand. But can you see the Troll King city from here? Of course not. However, I've been looking north almost every day for the past year. Even if I can't see the Troll King city, I can still feel its existence. Charles clenched his fists, and his eyes seemed to flicker with raging flames. Have you been to the Troll King city? I have. I sneaked in with the caravan once before, but this time, we're going to kill our way in. Colin smiled. I hope that the Troll King city is as easy to capture as this Gale castle. It shouldn't be too difficult. After all, the troll army has already gone south. Even the Troll King city probably won't have elite regular troops stationed there. Colin turned to look at Charles's side profile and suddenly frowned. But Charles, don't you think that our journey has been a bit too smooth? Charles was a little stunned. Too smooth? Colin, what are you worried about? Do you think this is a trap for the trolls? Trap? Charles could not help but laugh. Colin, aren't you worrying a little too much? The trolls' last 100,000 troops have already gone south. It's inevitable that there will be emptiness inside. How can it be a trap? Colin grabbed a handful of snow from the fence and kneaded it into 2 snowballs, one big and one small. Charles, what do you think will happen if the trolls' army is a motley crew and the last batch of elite troops are placed in the Troll King city? No, it can't be, Charles said in a daze as he looked at the snowball that kept changing its position in Colin's hand. Do you know? Colin smiled playfully. Not long ago, I played a similar trick in Silver Moon City. Those stupid Eastern region people were fooled by me. Really? Charles smiled. I heard that you defeated the Sky Horse army in Silver Moon City. How did you do it? It's very simple. First, I made the Eastern region people mistakenly believe that the Black Cavalry was hiding outside the city. But when the Eastern region people sent their elites to search for the Black Cavalry outside the city, they only found a group of half-elven recruits. The real Black Cavalry came out of Silver Moon City. Colin changed the positions of the snowballs in his hand. It's that simple. Charles suddenly had a look of realization. He said in admiration, "It's indeed a brilliant plan." Colin stared into Charles's eyes as if trying to find something in them. Charles, do you think the trolls are playing a similar trick on us now? This is impossible? Charles was surprised. How did the trolls know that we would take the opportunity to attack the Troll King city? What if? Colin's eyes had a trace of scrutiny. Someone snitches? Snitch? The fear on Charles's face did not seem to be fake at all. Colin, did you discover something? Did our whereabouts really get exposed? No, it's just a guess. Phew, you scared me. Charles patted his chest and let out a long sigh. Then, he said in a sincere tone, Colin, actually, your worries are not impossible. Let's do it this way. When we reach the Troll King city, we will launch a tentative attack. If the resistance in the city is too strong, it won't be too late for us to withdraw. That makes sense. Colin threw out 2 snowballs. A moment later, they hit the ground and made 2 thuds. He patted the remaining snow on his hands and said with a smile, I just patted around the Howling Wind Castle. I have to say, this castle is built very sturdy. If Knight Brad hadn't tampered with the walls and the guards in the city were that group of stupid mercenaries, I'm afraid we would have to pay a heavy price to take down this place. Charles puffed out his chest and said in a proud tone, Colin, to tell you the truth, I actually asked Knight Brad to tamper with the walls so that we could take down this castle more smoothly. Colin ignored Charles's attempt to claim credit and continued, so, if such a sturdy fortress were to be retaken by the troll army heading south after we leave, hee. Tell me, don't you think we'll have nowhere to retreat to? Charles was stunned, as if he was really frightened by Colin's idea. After a while, he shook his head and said, Colin, aren't you overthinking things? The troll army has long gone to the northern frontier. Why would they suddenly turn back? Colin did not answer this question. Instead, he said with a smile, Charles, you know, I hate 2 kinds of people the most. Which 2? Charles asked in confusion. People who deceive me, and people who I can't deceive. Charles was speechless. This was the first time he had seen someone who said double standards so matter-of-factly. Colin looked at Charles with a smile and said, if I were a troll, I would purposely make it look like a large-scale invasion to the south and trick Ice Stone City into sending out their most elite cavalry to ambush the troll capital. But in reality, the army heading south was nothing more than a motley crew of newly recruited soldiers, militia, and mercenary groups. The last elite army of the giant demon empire was stationed in the giant demon king city. When the northern frontier cavalry is badly battered at the troll capital and wants to retreat, they will find that the Howling Wind Castle has been reoccupied by the returning Southern Army. This way, hee, isn't it like closing the door and beating the dog? Charles blinked, first nodded, then shook his head, and said, Colin, your analysis is reasonable, but the trolls can't have predicted that we would ambush the troll capital before we even sent out the troops, right? Colin leaned against the railing and stared into Charles's eyes. Unless, from the beginning, this was a trap to kill the Black Cavalry. And you were the one responsible for luring the Black Cavalry into the trap. What? Colin? How can you think that? Charles's face was full of shock and grievance. Then, he put on a look of righteous indignation. Colin, don't forget what kind of blood feud there is between me and the giant demons. Every day, I think about attacking the giant demon royal city and burning it to the ground. How can I help them? Colin watched Charles's performance with a smile. It was as if he had returned to that banquet in Ice Stone City a year ago. At that time, this movie king had almost fooled all the nobles of the northern frontier. Do you know when you were exposed? Chapter 197. Lying was an exceedingly exciting game. Gambling, war, politics, these were all things that people flocked to, and all of them required excellent lying skills. A good liar would be able to come up with a flawless lie without batting an eyelid. It would be so easy to come up with a perfect lie that people would be confused and feel as if they had been deceived for a lifetime. They might even become addicted to it and want to do it again after falling for it once. This kind of liar was usually respectfully called a master, or even an even more prestigious title, but those who were not skilled would be full of flaws and make people laugh. Actually, compared to lying, exposing a lie was also a very interesting thing. Especially when the liar was still trying to put up a final struggle. Colin now experienced this kind of joy. Although he had already seen through it, he was still willing to provide a stage for Charles to perform. Pretend, continue pretending. Colin, what do you mean by this? What did I reveal? Are you suspecting that I conspired with the great demons to scheme against you? Charles's expression and tone were just right. In a simple sentence, he conveyed astonishment, shock, grievance, and all kinds of complicated emotions. Colin smiled as he leaned against the fence and enjoyed Charles's performance. He said leisurely, "You said before that this operation has already received the approval of the Duke of St. Hilda. The Duke even promised that as long as I send troops to attack the great demon city, he will marry Vera to me?" Charles immediately nodded. Colin laughed coldly. "Did you know? On the third day after we left Ice Stone City, the Duke of St. Hilda publicly appeared. He first announced that Marquis Dawson, Earl Amon, and the others were traitors and ordered the Golden Lion Army to attack Ironforge City. Then he received the envoys sent by the various lords to Chilly Winter City. Even that brat from the Lamba family was received, but he did not receive the envoy from Ice Stone City. And this envoy is the one I sent to ask for the Duke's hand in marriage. He has been waiting in Chilly Winter City for more than 2 months. Charles's expression didn't change. In fact, he even revealed a similarly puzzled expression. After thinking for a moment, he explained, "Colin, I believe that Father isn't purposely targeting Ice Stone City. Instead, he wants to wait until you've successfully taken down the giant demon royal city before rewarding you and marrying Vera to you." "Is that so?" Colin actually nodded seriously. "That makes sense." Just as Charles secretly heaved a sigh of relief, he heard Colin ask, "Then, how do you explain the timing of the trolls' attack? When will the trolls attack?" Charles looked confused, as if he didn't understand what Colin meant. "If I remember correctly, you arrived at Ice Stone City on the March 26th. Seeing Charles nod, Colin chuckled and continued, "But the great demon city sent troops on the 23rd of March. Even if you received the news the moment the great demon city sent troops, how did you get to Ice Stone City from Howling Wind Castle in 3 short days? Could it be that you can fly? Or did you receive the news before the great demon city sent troops?" Hearing this, Charles's heart suddenly sped up, but his expression did not change. "Colin, did you make a mistake about the timing of the trolls' attack?" Seeing that Charles was still stubbornly resisting, Colin shook his head with a smile. He had seen the great demon army move with his own eyes through the eyes of the blood slaves, but Charles had appeared in Icestone City in 3 short days and even brought news of the great demon city's attack. At that time, he had concluded that there was something wrong with this Charles. Did I get it wrong? Then tell me, when exactly did the great demon city send troops? Colin chuckled as he looked at Charles and reminded him, however, you better think carefully before you speak. There are still many great demon captives in Howling Wind Castle. If your timing is different from what they said, then it will be difficult to deal with. Since he had said this much, Charles did not argue anymore. He slowly lowered his head and let the shadow cover his entire face. He did not speak anymore. The cold wind whistled and blew snowflakes into the watchtower, causing the already cold atmosphere to seem to drop by a few degrees. Colin looked at the silent Charles and suddenly sighed. He asked, if my guess is correct, the great demon city should have already told you the truth about the terrible defeat at the northern frontier at the beginning of last year, right? Charles did not answer. Just when Colin thought that the other party was not going to pay attention to him, Charles finally spoke, yes. His voice became as cold as frost, and the cold air that came out was even lower than the temperature of the sky ice field at this time. So, you have a grudge against the Duke of St. Hilda and decided to take this opportunity to take revenge on the northern frontier? Yes. Charles raised his head again, and his eyes flashed with undisguised hatred. My good father treats everyone as his tools, his chess pieces. In order to achieve his goal, he will not hesitate to abandon us. 200,000 northern frontier soldiers, hundreds of northern frontier lords, and countless people who died in the northern frontier due to war and famine, are insignificant in his eyes. As for me, Adams, Vera, Uncle Garcia, and of course you, Colin. In his eyes, we are worthless. Tell me, what qualifications does such a person have to become the lord of the northern frontier? What qualifications does he have to obtain our loyalty? This is the reason for your betrayal? Colin looked at Charles coldly. What is the difference between you now and the Duke of St. Hilda? You colluded with the trolls, framed your own people, and plunged the northern frontier into greater chaos. You are nothing but an ambitious person who only cares about your own interests. Don't put on a face of justice. Charles laughed and did not care about Colin's sarcasm. Instead, he advised, Colin, it is not too late to regret it now. I can help you put in a few good words in front of Mr. Kong. I think he will be willing to accept your loyalty. Colin laughed and mocked. Do you really think that the schemer of the St. Thean family will win? Charles shook his head. Before the dust settles, no one dares to say that they will win. However, I do not want to live in the shadow of the Duke of St. Hilda anymore. What about you? Colin, since you know what he has done, why do you continue to work for him? I am not working for him. Then what is it for? Colin pointed below. Under the moonlight, a group of black cavalry soldiers could be seen patrolling. Black cavalry? Oh, I understand. Charles suddenly understood. The Black Cavalry, which was established by Marquis Garcia, grew up in bloody battles with the trolls. The hatred for the trolls had been completely integrated into the soul of this army. If Colin chose to make peace with the trolls, then he would completely lose the morale of the Black Cavalry. Even if the Black Cavalry were willing to continue to fight for him under the oath, they would not be able to maintain their invincible combat power. What's more, Colin wanted to marry Vera. If the St. Thean family ruled the northern frontier, then Vera would completely lose her detached status. Moreover, an important helper of the St. Thean family, the Oman family, had a grudge against Colin. In short, unless it was a last resort, Colin would never seek refuge with the St. Thean family. Seeing that he could not persuade Colin, Charles said helplessly, Well, then I hope you can survive the whirlpool of the northern frontier. The northern frontier? There is no hurry. Let them fight for a while. Let me taste the feast that the trolls have prepared for me first. Charles was stunned, and then he said in disbelief, Do you still want to continue to attack the trolls' city? Colin showed an inscrutable smile. Yes, I am already here. Chapter 198. In the whistling northern wind, the falling snow dyed the world a vast expanse of white. An army of trolls was moving forward with great difficulty in the snow. The enormous and bloated army stretched for more than 10 kilometers. From above, it looked like a black python was moving forward. However, there were tiny ants around this giant python. These ants were the black cavalry sentries. They were insignificant compared to the enormous army of trolls. It was as if the python could crush these ants to death with a casual movement of its body. But the one who was truly nervous was the giant python. Prince Okamoto narrowed his eyes as he sized up the black cavalry sentries. His heart was filled with anxiety and even fear. He didn't know that the black cavalry sentries had appeared. Were they just Colin's eyes behind him out of habit, or was the black cavalry's main force nearby? If the original plan had been carried out smoothly, the black cavalry should already be on their way to the Troll Kingdom. And he could have led his 100,000 army south to turn back and occupy the 3 forts along the snowy mountain range, completely cutting off the black cavalry's path of retreat. But now, Prince Okamoto was somewhat uncertain. Could it be that Colin had seen through this trap? In his anxiety, Prince Okamoto sent out several groups of sentries in an attempt to scout the surrounding situation. But the moment these sentries were sent out, it was like a clay ox entering the sea. They never returned, and there was no trace of them. This situation left Prince Okamoto, who didn't have much experience in leading armies, somewhat dumbfounded. Only now did he realize how great the difference between a real army and an armchair strategist was. The young southern prince couldn't help but have a thought. Was he going to follow in his father's footsteps? 2 days quickly passed while Prince Okamoto was filled with doubts. In these 2 days, the black cavalry scouts surrounded the giant demon army. Whenever the giant demons tried to attack, they would immediately scatter. However, not long after, they would appear again. They were like flies that could not be chased away. At first, the troll soldiers were very nervous, but as time passed, they seemed to have gotten used to the swarm of flies around them. Anyway, these flies don't bite. So what if they follow? However, on the 3rd day, the black cavalry sentinel cavalry that had been following them from time to time suddenly disappeared without a trace. The trolls couldn't get used to this. The young Prince Okamoto didn't notice the danger at the first moment. Fortunately, there were some experienced troll generals in the troll army. When they noticed the abnormal behavior of the black cavalry scouts, they immediately sent someone to report to Prince Okamoto, reminding him that the main force of the black cavalry would be arriving soon. Only then did Prince Okamoto realize that the situation was far from good. He hurriedly ordered the troops to gather and prepare to face the enemy. However, the reaction of this large and bloated troll army was despairingly slow. It couldn't be helped. Prince Okamoto was leading a decoy army. Most of them were newly recruited soldiers. It was impossible to expect them to react quickly on the battlefield. However, the black cavalry wouldn't give the trolls any time to react. When the snowflakes began to spread in the distance, the sound of hooves could be heard. The troll generals felt the earth tremble and hurriedly shouted at the top of their lungs. They had the soldiers raise their shields and spears to protect the army. Unfortunately, the troll army, which was made up of a large number of new troll soldiers, still revealed many fatal weaknesses before the battle. Their formations were not in order, and they lacked basic coordination. Chaos began to spread from the flanks of the troll army like a plague. For a moment, all sorts of chaotic and panicked voices gathered together, causing the troll army to be unable to get into the rhythm of battle. In truth, the most panicked person at this moment wasn't the troll soldiers, but the commander of the troll army, Prince Okamoto. This troll demon prince, who had once thought highly of himself and believed that he could also devise strategies on the battlefield and determine victory from 1,000 miles away, was now panicking. Calmness in the face of battle and calmness in command had all disappeared from Prince Okamoto's mind. The mental preparations he had made before the battle were of no use at all. Prince Okamoto was at a loss when he heard all sorts of requests for orders. At this moment, Prince Okamoto finally understood that he wasn't a qualified commander. Even his father, whom he had always looked down on, was probably much stronger than him. Of course, this wasn't strange. Prince Okamoto was indeed intelligent, and he was adept at scheming and plotting, but these weren't necessary conditions to determine victory on the battlefield. In short, the troll army's performance in this sudden battle was indescribably terrible. Fortunately, the troll army still had the advantage in numbers. The recruits didn't immediately collapse when they saw their endless comrades. The black guards came quickly, accompanied by the thunder-like sound of horse hooves. Troop after troop of black armored cavalry rode over. But when they got close, they changed direction slightly and streaked past the troll army's flank. The buzzing of bowstrings immediately sounded, and the rain of arrows was like a swarm of locusts that filled the sky, flying towards the trolls in a black mass. Raise your shields. Don't move. Archers, get ready. Spear throwers, get ready. Voices rose and fell among the troll army, but they were quickly drowned out by the rumbling of hooves. Arrows fell like rain, and the sound of flesh being pierced rang out. Swathes of troll soldiers fell to the ground, their screams endless. There was no war of words, no scheming and no scheming. The black cavalry used the most direct and violent method to open the curtains to the battle. There was almost no pause in the wave of attacks. Thousands of black cavalry formed several ranks, galloping past the troll army's flank. Arrows constantly rose into the sky, turning into a continuous spring rain that rained down on the troll army's heads. The troll army also paid a heavy price for the chaos from before. They didn't raise their shields in time, and their shields weren't tight enough. The troll soldiers gathered together were like wheat fields blown by a gust of wind, falling one by one. Blood flowed freely, dyeing the ground beneath their feet red. After thousands of black cavalry galloped past, a clear red line was drawn across the troll army's flank. Countless corpses lay there, and the injured soldiers howled. The troll soldiers who were lucky enough to be unharmed gripped their shields tightly, trembling as they held them above their heads. But this was only the beginning. Once the curtains to the battle had been drawn, it wouldn't stop so easily. The black cavalry's attack was meant to be a distraction. After all, Colin wasn't sure if this troll army that had returned from the south was really a diversion. But after the short and cruel first clash, Colin was 80% sure that the last elite army of the Troll Empire wasn't here. But he wasn't impatient. In his opinion, the fate of this bloated and weak troll army was already decided. The only thing he needed to pay attention to was how to take down the enemy with as few casualties as possible. At this moment, the black cavalry had already circled back and once again used the unique method of cavalry to quickly sweep past the troll army's flank, repeating everything that had happened before. This scene was like a replay of the bloody battle on the icy plains a year ago. Prince Okamoto looked at the black cavalry that were recklessly slaughtering the troll army. He racked his brains, but he couldn't find a way to break out of this situation. The endless screams in his ears made Prince Okamoto even more vexed. What was worse was that the generals under him were looking at him with eyes full of distrust. Thus, the angry Prince Okamoto gave a foolish order: "You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.